Chapter 290. Although the royal garden was luxurious, it couldn't compare to the flowers that were blooming all over the mountain. People were dancing under the trees. Young Langjuns dressed in red and green with makeup and flowers on their hair, walked among them. They took their seats one by one. At a glance, they were even more beautiful than the blooming flowers. Wuxia wore a snow-green robe and a lacquered gauze crown. He held a rui in his hand. He sat upright with a cold expression on his face. He was already over 30 years old, but he didn't look any worse than those young men. He had a maturity and steadiness that they didn't have. He looked coldly at the Langjuns who came together. Some were smiling, some were frowning, and some were nodding slightly at him. There were hundreds of different expressions and all of them were romantic. Only the obscure fawning was the same. They were like peacocks spreading their feathers, and they couldn't wait to show off their most magnificent side. Time passed and his eyes drifted. He seemed to have returned to decades ago when he was one of those nobles. However, he always remembered that he looked calm and composed at that time. He played the zither, talked about poems and commented on calligraphy and paintings, but he was actually sweating profusely. It was as if his heart was being threatened by an invisible hand. If he was not careful, it would be squeezed tightly. He was anxious and panicked. When the assessment was over, he went home in a panic and poured out his uneasiness and timidity to Amin. Amin stared at him with hidden bitterness. To this day he still remembered Amin's angry complaints. How pretentious, what kind of test is this? Wuxia was confused. Chief Lu, all the Langjuns have taken their seats. We can begin. While he was thinking, his colleague beside him carefully woke him up. Wuxia opened his slightly tipsy eyes, as if he had just had a good sleep. Looking at the nobles who were more beautiful than the scenery, Wuxia smiled and said, "Let's start over there." The assessment in Dongqing took place every 3 years. The information about the family background, in the top 3 categories had long been sent to Shangjing from other places. Wuxia arrived in Shangjing a little late. He had spent the past few days on this. He read through the information of all the candidates for the assessment and ranked them according to their family background, status and identity in their families. He gave them the corresponding scores. They were roughly categorized as superior, medium, and inferior. Although there were only about 100 people participating in the assessment, they were all carefully selected from all over Dongqing. Each of them had a strong family background and could not afford to offend any of them. If there was a huge dispute over the ranking, Wuxia would have offended their backer. As mentioned before, morality, appearance, and temperament could be used to bribe the examiners. Wuxia had received a lot of bribes and benefits in the past few days. Whether it was real money or antiques, those people's generosity had left Wuxia speechless and widened his horizons. No wonder everyone wanted to be a general evaluation officer. Even if they didn't start their business for 3 years, once they started their business, they would be able to make a living for 30 years. Ability, which was the ability to boast, had already been submitted to him. Wuxia had also seen all of them. Most of them were flashy and boastful. Why did they say that it was flashy but without substance? Take a chestnut for example. A person with a thin waist who took 5 distilled powder all day, which caused his skin to be too delicate. He could only wear soft old clothes and couldn't even take a shower. Yet he could draw a bow that could kill 2 birds with 1 stone and fight 2 tigers alone. Wasn't that funny? Oh, maybe it was the kind of tigress that sweated the silk clothes and knocked the jade pillow with a golden hairpin? Wuxia inadvertently became an experienced driver and drove a car in an artistic manner. It was called an assessment, but it was more like a large-scale gathering with a purpose. All the Langjuns were showing off their talents. Those who dared to show off their talents all had something up their sleeves. Wuxia had thought it was boring at first, but now he was more into it. The atmosphere was very harmonious. As mentioned before, the assessment was more like a large-scale gathering of the royal family. Those who participated were not only the nobles, but also many important ministers and their families. The emperor, his concubines, princes and concubines would all be there. Although there were many people, it didn't seem noisy. Wuxia didn't remember such a scene. How would Jiang Pingji, who was a future general, know how to deal with it? Fortunately, as the legitimate son of the Feng family, Feng Jin had been through all kinds of big events since he was a child. He could still talk and smile with others. With Jiang Pingji, who was a burden. He was like a butterfly flying through flowers. He greeted and talked to everyone he met and didn't forget to introduce Jiang Pingji to them. They were all a group of wily old foxes. Even if they hadn't heard of Jiang Pingji before, they didn't dare to ignore her just because she was the son of Lu County chief. Jiang Pingji followed Feng Jin and did know many people. Lanting, you don't like to talk to people? Feng Jin sat down in his seat according to his status. He tilted his head and asked her. Jiang Pingji sighed and said, "No, I just feel that the circle of nobles is really messy." Feng Jin was dumbfounded. The circle of nobles was really messy? He could recognize the four words separately, but he couldn't understand them when they were put together. However, as smart as he was, he could figure it out just by looking at the literal meaning. "Why do you say that?" Feng Jin couldn't help but laugh. He was not prepared for Jiang Pingji's shocking words, so he moved closer to her and lowered his voice. "Nowadays, men are actually so popular?" Even if she came from the future world which was abnormally open, not everyone was gay. However, after meeting so many people with Feng Jin, she sincerely suspected that she had entered a world of pornography. She even had an illusion that she was probably the only straight man in the world. Bah, she was a woman. Feng Jin's snow-white skin was dyed a little red. He said uncomfortably, "Can your eyes not look around?" Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue. "Are you asking me to close my eyes and not look?" When she saw the other party, her brain would automatically think and analyze. Could she be blamed for that? It was a professional habit that she had developed over the years. It wasn't something that she could change even if she wanted to. Feng Jin choked and had a strange expression on his face, but he still added in a low voice. "The relationship in the court is messy. As long as it doesn't affect the continuation of the family line, it's very common to become brothers." Many sworn brothers would even buy betrothal gifts for the other half so that the other half could get married and have children to continue the family line. After all, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and having no descendants was the worst. Longyang's division of peaches was already against the family line. If one of them died because of this, how could he face his ancestors 100 years later? Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes, which made Feng Jin feel uneasy. There was always an indescribable feeling in his heart. "I'm not interested in this kind of hobby. Lanting, you don't have to look at me like this. It's weird." It was usually fine, but when Jiang Pingji stared at him seriously, Feng Jin always had the strange illusion that his whole body was being seen through. Jiang Pingji giggled and said to him, "Why you is upright and upright? Why are you afraid of me?" "I'm not afraid. I just don't like it." Feng Jin said helplessly, "Sit properly. If others see you like this, they will most likely blame County Chief Lu for not raising you well." Suddenly, he remembered something and reminded her, "Lanting, remember not to run around. The royal villa is not like your own home. Every move of yours is being watched. Don't talk and don't do anything. Just be quiet, okay?" Chapter 291. Jiang Pingji's words could not be trusted, including the punctuation. Although Jiang Pingji had never participated in a large-scale party in the ancient times, she had participated in one in the previous era. As the most powerful military leader in the Federation, she had people supporting her wherever she went. For important banquets of the Federation, the organizers would habitually send her an invitation. Whether she would attend or not depended on her mood. After comparing the parties in the 2 eras, she realized that regardless of whether it was the ancient times or her era, it was nothing more than the same routine. However, as the commander of the army, she was treated with respect and had to submit to others. Now she was just a shrimp. Her ears listened to the moving music and her eyes watched the graceful dance. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. Being invisible had its advantages. At least she did not have to deliberately remember who someone was. She did not have to think about someone's family background and other human relationships. Then she had to think about how she should talk to the person. It was so tiring to even talk. She was so bored. It's hard for you to watch so intently. Are their dances that good? Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen. The audience's comments were focused on the dancers' bodies, faces, and skin. As for the dance moves, they all felt that it was too slow. It felt like an old man or an old woman practicing Tai Chi in the park. It was not as good as the square dance. Although she did not know what Tai Chi was or what square dance was, judging from the bullet screen, it should not be easy to describe. The body turns and waves the sleeves lightly. The eyebrows are furrowed. Feng Jin looked at the dancers who were dancing gracefully. He clapped his hands and smiled without turning his head. Waist like a willow, voice like an oriole. This feeling needs to be savored carefully. Lanting is impatient. You should calm down. Jiang Pingji was dumbfounded. She looked at Feng Jin, who was engrossed in watching, then at the dancers and then at the audience in the streaming room. Suddenly, she felt that the audience in the streaming room and her aesthetic standards were in the same dimension. Feng Jin was already a god. The dance moves are pretty good, but I prefer the enchanting ones. Fair skin, long legs, big breasts, and perky buttocks. The audience in the streaming room unanimously agreed with what she said. Zhang Chenghua Jishui, I like such honest and sincere streamers. Pai Pai Hai was show. Actually, I like hot bodies too. I only pay attention to hot female streamers. I don't watch those without bodies. The streamer is the only one who doesn't rely on her body. She relies on her inner qualities to attract me. You are the most special. Shu Shu takes you to see goldfish. Have a safe journey. Hashtag Candlestick. The little angel in the streaming room agreed with Jiang Pingji's point of view, but Feng Jin, an orthodox male from ancient times, was not so open-minded. Her snow-white face was dyed red, and it was obvious that she was embarrassed. Vulgar. Feng Jin was Feng. Jiang Pingji understood that a young man like Feng Jin, even if he liked girls with nice skin, he would not say it out loud. She snorted coldly. Huayu, you're lying. How am I vulgar? Feng is Don I Feng Hua. Dozen. Don. Feng. Dozen. Jiang is with Jiang I Feng colon, Li Jiang Feng Jiang. Feng, colon, Jiang I Jiang Pingji misinterpreted his words. Feng Jin was no match for her. He gritted his teeth and said, Lanting, do you dare to let Chief Lu hear what you said? Jiang Pingji retorted indifferently, Huayu, have you forgotten who I went to the brothel with? Feng Jin, who else could it be? Your father Lu Shi. Fine, he lost. No. Feng Jin suddenly remembered that the girl next to him was a girl, not a boy. Thinking of this, his expression became thought-provoking. He looked like he was constipated. Chief Lu, your daughter is like this. Why don't you take care of her? Lu Shi said, what can I do? I'm also desperate. Not to mention going to a brothel. Even if my daughter went to a small restaurant in the south courtyard, I would accompany her. Jiang Pingji looked at the hopeless Feng Jin. She smiled and squinted her eyes. There were all kinds of bad things about the ancient times, but one thing was for sure. The people were conservative. Take Feng Jin for example. No matter how serious he was still a teenager. He was very young. As long as Jiang Pingji put down her pride and put on a do-whatever-you-want attitude, Feng Jin would not be able to do anything to her. Feng Jin drank a lot of wine and looked embarrassed. He asked a maid to lead him to the toilet. Jiang Pingji saw him leave and looked at the empty seat next to her. She raised her eyebrows and stood up. She was quite curious about the royal courtyard of the ancient era. As a qualified streamer, she had to satisfy the audience's needs. Learning from Feng Jin's elegant speech, Jiang Pingji successfully hooked up with a maid in palace attire to lead her away from the banquet. Zhang Chenghua Jishui, Granny, I just want to visit the ancient royal garden. I don't want to visit the toilet. If you want to go to the toilet, I don't mind. Jiang Pingji's mouth twitched when she saw the comment. She never thought that the audience in the ancient times would have such hardcore taste. I wonder if this lady knows where the Langjuns who are participating in the assessment are? I have a few good friends who are in this batch. Looking at the time, the assessment should have started for some time, but I still feel a little anxious in my heart. I wonder if Miss can lead the way for me? The palace maid pursed her lips into a smile. Langjun, you are calling me a slave. The rules of the royal garden are strict. Everyone has their own way. A lowly slave like me is not qualified to go there. If you want to go, I can show you the way. You will see it after passing through the garden. Then I'll have to trouble you. The garden in the imperial garden was not something the Lu Manor's small garden could compare to. The garden was filled with exotic flowers and plants. Even though it was late autumn, the garden was still blooming with beautiful purple and red flowers. The bright colors dispelled the bleakness and made the garden more lively. It was said that the imperial garden in Shangyang Palace was more than 10 times bigger than this one. Usually only the emperor, the concubines and the princes and concubines could go there. No one else could get close. Jiang Pingji was not qualified to step into the garden of the royal family if it was not for the special occasion, let alone walk around casually and admire the beautiful scenery. Jiang Pingji did not even have the right to enter the garden of the royal family. Your Highness, be gentle. Jiang Pingji found a secluded place and prepared to rest on an artificial hill. A member of the audience who studied biology in the streaming room expressed his interest in the unfamiliar plants in the garden and wanted to observe them up close. He asked Jiang Pingji if he could stay in the garden for a while. It would be even better if she could zoom in and let him observe them carefully. She thought that she had nothing to do, so she agreed. However, after she closed her eyes for a while, she heard a coquettish gasp from below. The gasp of a man and a woman was getting louder and more urgent. Jiang Pingji, who was sitting above, was speechless. The audience in the streaming room was even more direct. Chapter 292. According to Jiang Pingji's five senses, she naturally knew that there were two people in the mountain stream, under the rockery. However, they were well behaved at the beginning. Maybe they were a couple who had committed to each other and took the opportunity to confess their feelings. She was also very confident in her concealment skills. She was sure that she would not reveal her tracks and scare the couple. She was very pure, but the old driver was skilled in driving. He drove the car so suddenly that it caught her off guard. The couple did not say anything and could not wait to hug each other. They tore off each other's clothes. Not long after, they took off their clothes one by one. They went straight to the third base. Their actions were intense. The pearls and jadeite on the girl's head hit the rockery wall, making a slight knocking sound. Jiang Pingji was stunned on the spot. The audience in the streaming room was clamoring to see the live version. Zhang Chengwai Jimisiju, ow ow ow, Granny, can you adjust the camera angle of the live stream room? I can only hear the sound but can't see the image. Feels weird. An excellent live stream room should have excellent sound and color. Lao Ciji Lianming, this car is so unexpected. Even if I'm an old driver, I almost drifted off the curve of the mountain. Jiang Pingji quickly calmed down. She did not agree to the request of the audience in the streaming room, nor did she leave the spot. As a result, the pair of lovebirds who were secretly looking for an opportunity to have sex in the wild, were completely unaware. They were having fun, and from the sounds they seemed to be playing different tricks and positions. They were completely unaware that Jiang Pingji was half lying on the path created by the rockery, as well as 10,000 spectators. Jiang Pingji deeply felt that even though she was not the primary student of Grim Reaper that the audience spoke of, and people died wherever she went, she had something in common with that person. It seemed that she could encounter interesting things wherever she went. This time she even encountered a couple having sex in the wild. Host V. The Dongqing royal family is doomed. The emperor has an affair with the wife of his minister and his father's concubine. The son has an affair with another son's future wife on a day like the assessment. They are not afraid of people coming and going. They are caught red-handed. The audience in the streaming room looked at the bullet screen and was a little confused. Zhang Chengwai G2A, #despise. Granny, are you secretly watching? Otherwise, how would she know who the couple is? Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes. She did not want to be in the limelight. However, no one in the live stream room could keep up with her brain, so she could only accommodate the other party. Host V. Judging from his voice, the man is Wuma Jun. I've met him a few times and he will become my brother-in-law. The expressions of the viewers in the live streaming room cracked. *CK Wuma Jun? How dare he make a cuckold of the streamer's sister in front of the streamer? Jiang Pingji sent another bullet screen. Host V. The woman is from the northern borderline. Why do you make such a judgment? Because Wuma Jun just ripped off the other party's dress. The sound of fabric tearing is not ordinary silk or satin. This is a special fabric that only a few nobles in the northern borderline can wear. I've read about this in a book called Unofficial History. The author was so bored that he tore different kinds of fabrics and carefully recorded the difference in the tearing sound. Because of the intense movements, the pearls and jade necklaces on the woman's head knocked against the stone wall. The quality of the fabric can also be heard. The woman's clothes were stripped off. The action was so intense that the pearls and jade necklaces were scattered on the ground. Jiang Pingji could figure out how many pieces of jewelry fell on the ground and whether the quality was good or not just by listening to the sound. Combining the above points, she thought about the people from the northern borderline who came to Dongqing recently. Naturally, this identity of his was obvious. Lao Ciji Lianming, I don't know. Should I say that the streamer has good ears or that she has seen too many things? She seems to know everything. He was having sex, but she could hear so many things that had nothing to do with the topic. Her face was cold. She felt that she and the streamer were not from the same world. Oh, that's not right. They were not from the same world. Although Jiang Pingji was listening to an overflowing drama at a close distance, her expression remained normal. Her eyes were still clear and bright. She was not affected by the wild mandarin ducks below at all. Some veterans in the streaming room could not help but call for Miss Five Fingers just by listening to the sound. In the eyes of the audience, Jiang Pingji was too cold, but it was normal for her. If a well-trained genetic warrior could not even control his physiological reactions, he would have been kicked out of the ranks of genetic warriors long ago. After about the time it took to burn 2 joss sticks, the wild mandarin ducks below finally stopped. They hugged each other and panted. At that moment, a member of the audience jeered and asked Jiang Pingji, "You dialed his phone is switched off. Streamer, you listen to the show for free. Don't you have anything to say? Host V. Trash. Looking at these two short words, many of the veteran audience members revealed a meaningful smile. The pair of wild mandarin ducks below calmed down for a while. Then there was the sound of them putting on their clothes quietly. Your Fourth Highness, and Yaina will remember what happened today deeply. Your Fourth Highness? Haha, it was indeed Wuma Jun. Jiang Pingji sneered as she listened. One was the fourth prince of Dongqing, and the other was the princess of the northern borderline, who was about to become the second princess consort. They came to the rockery on such a special day. They were really too much. What did the fourth prince want to do? Wuma Jun had woken up from what had happened just now, but his voice was still a little hoarse. Are you really going to marry my second brother? He can't give you the honor you deserve, Wuma Jun said disdainfully. The princess of the northern borderline, whose name was Yaina, sighed softly and said, My father wants me to marry your second brother, so I have to marry him. Which woman in the world hasn't gone through life like this? They are all pitiful people who have no choice. I have no regrets since I gave my chastity to you early on. Jiang Pingji pouted. Princess Yaina was also good at acting. She did not even have a draft when she spoke. She boasted as soon as she opened her mouth. Your Fourth Highness, let's accept it. From now on, I'm your second sister-in-law. We don't have to keep in touch secretly anymore. If someone finds out, they will mistakenly think that the northern borderline is disloyal to Dongqing and that the marriage is just a cover-up. We will be the sinners of both countries. Jiang Pingji had thought that the princess was extraordinary. Now, it seemed that she was not as good as her reputation. No, her reputation was not as good as her reputation. At the end of the day, she just wandered between different men and played with power. The northern borderline wanted the princess to sow discord between the second prince and the Count of Jinbei's residence, so that the relationship between the emperor and the prince would be at loggerheads. It would be best if Dongqing would never have a day of peace. Unexpectedly, the princess had already destroyed the relationship between the two princes before she married into the northern borderline. Logically speaking, Wuma Jun was ambitious. Although he was young, he liked to plan before taking action. He was not like a brainless pig. How could he be easily hooked by Princess Yaina and believe in her affectionate performance? She frowned, but she forgot that most men nowadays regarded women as vassals and objects. Who was he referring to as having long hair and short knowledge? Princess Yaina's acting skills were too good, and Wuma Jun was too conceited. Chapter 293. Jiang Pingji did not intend to show herself. Naturally, she would not let others discover her traces. She kept a sneer on her lips as she listened to the man and woman being lovey-dovey to each other. Due to the obstacles of reality, they had to go their separate ways and forget about each other. To be honest, a more active gossiper could write a short story about sadomasochistic love in minutes. Jiang Pingji lifted her eyelids. All kinds of sadomasochistic love stories had popped up in the streaming room. Some experienced players who were proficient in all kinds of romantic plots could accurately guess the conversation between Princess Yaina and Wuma Jun. They echoed each other. It was simply a trap. If it were not for the situation, Jiang Pingji would have laughed out loud. People who thought they were smart were always the stupidest. In a sense, the man and woman below were a perfect match. Jiang Pingji was happy to watch a good show, but the audience in the streaming room did not quite understand. Canteen Daffin Auntie, Granny, isn't Wuma Jun your sister's future husband? He's cheating on you in front of you. Don't you have any temper? I'm looking forward to your sister complex acting up and beating up Wuma Jun and his little mistress. Not only was the audience looking forward to it, but the entire audience in the streaming room was looking forward to it. They had long been accustomed to Jiang Pingji's unreasonable and protective style. Even if she was a concubine's sister in ancient times, she would be the daughter of a concubine or an illegitimate daughter or a mistress in modern times. However, this was ancient times. Concubines' daughters also had human rights. It was justifiable. They did not think about how Jiang Pingji would fight for justice for the daughter born of a concubine. However, Wuma Jun was having sex with another woman in broad daylight before marrying her. He was a jerk. According to the streamer's temperament, she would definitely come forward and beat him up. Jiang Pingji smiled. After testing Lu Shi in Chongqing Alley, she had basically figured out the identity of the daughter born of a concubine in the manor. In other words, the daughter born of a concubine was not on the same side as the Lu family from the moment she was born. It was impossible for them to be on the same side in the future. As for sibling love or brotherly love, there was no trace of it at all. Lu Shi had taken this into consideration. He had secretly instructed the second wife and Madame Dai to separate Lu Shi from the daughter born of a concubine. They had never interacted with each other before, so naturally, there was no relationship between them. Lucy knew that the mistress's daughter had an unusual identity and was most likely on the opposite side. Lucy intended to marry the mistress's daughter to Wuma Jun. It was obvious that he had dug a trap for the kid to jump into. Under such circumstances, Jiang Pingji still stood up for the mistress's daughter. She had nothing better to do. Host V, you want to mess with Wuma Jun and Anyina? Hey, it was only a matter of time. The path that Jiang Pingji wanted to take, these two were stumbling blocks. Perhaps they were small gravel or pebbles. Sooner or later she had to kick them away. However, the reason couldn't be to vent his anger for a concubine sister who had nothing to do with him. Obviously, the audience in the streaming room liked to join in the fun without using their brains. No one could tell that Jiang Pingji was playing with words. Princess Anyina watched Wuma Jun leave the rockery affectionately. She stayed where she was and carefully cleaned up her appearance. Then she left with a normal expression. Jiang Pingji continued to sit there, unmoving like a mountain. After a few breaths, Anyina, who had already left, returned. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. The princess, who was expected by the royal family of the northern borderline, was quite capable. Anyina didn't notice her, but she was very suspicious. She pretended to walk far away and quietly turned back to take a look. When Anyina's aura was completely gone, Jiang Pingji jumped off the rockery with ease. The ventilation there was smooth. The aura left by the couple's mischief was so weak that it was almost undetectable. However, for Jiang Pingji, whose 5 senses were different from ordinary people, her nose was filled with a strange smell. She frowned slightly, and there was some disgust and contempt in her eyes. She slightly controlled her 5 senses, and the nauseating aura became much lighter. She took off another perfume pouch from her waist and sniffed it gently. Only then did she feel better. Wuma Jun and Anyina left one after another. Jiang Pingji chose another winding path and left the rockery after making several turns. It was a special day. The garden, which was usually quiet, was more lively. Many noble ladies, who were gorgeously dressed and exquisitely dressed, were touring the garden together. Their eyebrows or foreheads were decorated with delicate red flower ornaments. The bright red color made the skin around them look even fairer and more delicate. The current atmosphere in Dongqing was not too closed. Although men and women touring together would be criticized, it was not a big deal. Therefore, apart from these noble ladies who were more beautiful than flowers, there were many young men in elegant clothes in the garden, beside the waterside pavilion and in the gazebo. Out of tacit understanding, both parties were clearly separated. Even if they were familiar with each other, they would only look at each other from afar, separated by a small forest or a cluster of flowers. They would quickly look away. The evaluation day was not only related to the future of the noble son's officialdom, but it might also affect their marriage. Jiang Pingji was naturally a noble son, but she was still young. She was still young and small in stature, but her facial features were very distinctive. She was more feminine yet full of heroic spirit. After a few years, when she had completely grown up and gained some scholarly honors and fame, this was the image of a husband in the eyes of many aristocratic ladies. The most important thing was that she had to be handsome. It was not masculine, but a beauty that was mixed with the gentleness of a woman. It was best if her gender was indistinguishable. Not only that, her figure had to be tall and thin, her temperament had to be as gentle as jade, and she had to treat people gently. She had to be knowledgeable and talented. Avoiding the path that the noble ladies took, Jiang Pingji looked around and went to the octagonal pavilion that was on a higher ground. Standing there and looking into the distance, those with better eyesight could see the scholars who were participating in the evaluation. When she went over, there were already 3 unfamiliar men sitting in the octagonal pavilion. Jiang Pingji did not know them, so she just nodded politely. They did not mind Jiang Pingji coming over to disturb them. Instead, they smiled and turned their heads to continue chatting with their friends. The fallen petals were in profusion. The falling petals moved with the wind and covered the ground. Hundreds of scholars were scattered along the riverside and in the small forest. Graceful maids shuttled back and forth while carrying fine wine and delicacies. Occasionally, the sound of elegant music could be heard. Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room were silent. Their expressions were subtle. How could this be called an examination? Oh no, this was an evaluation. Lao Siji Lianming, I probably went to a fake school. Shaoxiang Huasher Si Lu Si, I probably met a group of fake teachers. Sans Hisang Shiningsher, I probably did a bunch of fake test papers. Bingtang Lemon Guatang, I probably entered a fake examination hall. Jiang Pingji, separated by such a distance, Others could only see a blurry figure, but it was different for Jiang Pingji. She could see all kinds of people. At that moment, Wei Xi's bun was slightly different. He raised his hand and touched it. A blooming beauty's sleep fell on top of his head. The beauty's sleep only bloomed in autumn and winter. The colder it was, the more beautiful it was when it bloomed. Its fragrance assailed one's nostrils. He looked at the flower and was slightly lost in thought. Not knowing what he was recalling, his expression became a little bitter. At that moment he seemed to have sensed someone's gaze. He quietly looked over. Even though he could only see a blurry figure, how could he not recognize it? Chapter 294. Although Dongqing's aristocratic families were becoming more and more outrageous, it was undeniable that the children from those aristocratic families were indeed capable. There will always be talented people in every generation. So it's really one wave pushing the other. These young people are really amazing. They are all the pillars of the country. The deputy examiner beside Lu Shi sighed with emotion. The other examiners echoed in unison. Why else would they say that they are young talents? The world today will soon be theirs. It's good to be young. In a few years, perhaps old bones like us will have to give up our positions to the more capable. Nowadays these young juniors really make one envious. A great scholar spoke. His sideburns were white and his face was full of wrinkles. However, his skin was rosy and he was full of vigor. The triennial assessment was a very important day for Dongqing. Although Lu Shi was the general examiner, there were more than 10 deputy examiners beside him. They were either old ministers in the court, famous scholars, or learned scholars. Every one of them had more experience than Lu Shi. However, Lu Shi hated it when they took advantage of their seniority. Listening to the few of them sighing, he secretly clicked his tongue in his heart. Then he sneered coldly. Even a pig would have 2 hoofs to walk when a large amount of resources was thrown at it, let alone a human. The other assessments were almost done one after another. The atmosphere was also heated up. Under the urging of a few deputy examiners, Lu Shi got up from the couch. Then he took out a scroll from his sleeve. 2 maids came forward and removed the seal on the scroll. They unfolded it and hung it on the shelf. Seeing that scroll, all the scholars had already perked up. The highlight of the day's assessment was coming. When they saw the big word on the scroll, they were all stunned. They either frowned in deep thought or secretly muttered, "People." That was the only word on the scroll. It was also the topic of the assessment this time. In layman's terms, it was a written essay with a topic. The examiner gave the topic and the students answered it freely. There was no limit to the number of words, the format of the content, and the theme of the article. As long as the topic was closely related to the people, be it governance of the people, farming, commodity trading, or education, it would not be considered as going off topic. It seems simple, but in fact it was very difficult to deal with. First of all, the topic was too broad. There were many things that could be written. Because of this, it was too difficult to write something that was brilliant, incisive, thought-provoking, or to be praised by Lu Shi. Most of the time it was better to be neutral. Secondly, most of them were sons of aristocratic families with excellent family backgrounds. Although they did not talk about politics, they also did not have much contact with the common people. Most of what they knew came from books. If they were not careful, they could easily write false information. How could they enter the topic? To them, handing in the mission wasn't difficult. What was difficult was how to stand out and suppress the others. Of course, Jiang Pingji also saw the question. She frowned. Lu Shi's test question could be said to be easy, but it could also be said to be too difficult. It was indeed a bit tricky. The characters follow the corpse and follow the clan. Corpse meant that the body was unable to move, and by extension, it meant that the body could not migrate or move. Sure meant country and clan. When the two were combined, it was the people. If one thought about it in a divergent way, Min could not only be interpreted as the common people, but also as the national economy and the people's livelihood. From the connection between the two, the basic necessities of life, food, housing, and transportation related to the people could all be included in the thinking. The national economy and the people's livelihood, such as reading and being rich in the country, could also be used as a starting point for the question. More importantly, after Lu Shi gave the question, he did not give any other hints. The students were also very confused. If they could know Lu Shi's inner bias, they would be able to think about the key points and cater to his preferences. Many of the scholars were in a difficult position. When the deputy examiners saw it, although they had objections in their hearts, they did not say it out loud. He cared about the people's livelihood, and he was pragmatic. What else could they say? Seeing the question, Wei Ci curled his lips slightly. He was very sure that there was something wrong with Lu Shi, but overall he did not seem to be that annoying. The question had been given, and it was not convenient for the scholars to communicate and discuss. Many examiners were watching from above, so they could only rely on their own abilities. While the others were still thinking about Lu Shi's preferences, a few scholars had already started to grind the stones, lay the paper, and picked up their pens to write. Lu Shi's eyes swept around. Those who started writing were basically the candidates that he had expected. He could not help but secretly sigh in his heart. They had left their names in the annals of history based on their abilities. Naturally, there was a certain reason for that. There was no point in being envious or jealous of such talents. He walked around a little and swept his gaze across the few people's writing desks. He could not help but nod. The question that he gave was indeed very broad, but as long as it did not deviate from the people, it would basically not stray from the topic. Rather than being greedy and wanting to state countless contents in a short space of time, which would result in the essay being empty, it was better to seize a point and focus on explaining it. Of course, it was one thing to understand the principle, but it was another thing to be able to write something substantial. Some people had already understood Lu Shi's intentions, but when they started writing, they realized that they could not write anything substantial. Based on their analysis of Lu Shi, he could be considered a practical person. What was the use of exaggerating? He might even prefer those who knew about agriculture and water conservancy, and were hardworking and capable. Of course, these people still had self-awareness. More people were disdainful. Everyone liked to listen to flattery. So what if the essay was beautifully written? As long as the general evaluation officer was comfortable reading it, it was fine. Therefore, there was no lack of fools who liked to show off their literary talent. Among the many scholars, Lu Shi cared the most about Master Yuanjing's few students and disciples. There was not much difference from what he had expected. Just from the content of the essay he could actually feel out the temperament of these people. The only one that surprised him was Wuxia, this fourth disciple of Master Yuanjing. It seemed that he was not like Amin had said. He only had a good face. Qingjing was steady and practical. He paid attention to farming and water conservancy. Hanyu was righteous and open-minded. His essay was related to the criminal law. Lu Zheng seemed to conform to the norm, but when he went deep into his essay he pointed out the current shortcomings of Dongqing and cried out for the people. But this Wuxia, just by looking at his appearance he was like a jade-like person. He was cold and had a bit of gentlemanly gentleness. He was strangely harmonious. However, his article was quite spicy and pungent. Even if Lu Shi admired his essay very much, he could not give him too high a score at this juncture. That was not the way to court death. This lad seemed to naively hope that all the people in the world could study. He gave a lot of practical suggestions and plans. The corner of Lu Shi's mouth twitched. He provoked the authority of the gentry at this time. Was he not afraid of being put in a difficult position? He sighed secretly. Wei Xi's deliberate act of looking for trouble was King ridiculous in Amin's eyes. However, the troubling matter was not over yet. Jiang Pingji was in the pavilion watching many scholars immerse themselves in their essays. She felt slightly comfortable. That was the atmosphere of an examination. However, she changed her opinion very quickly. Hiss! The sound of cloth tearing rang out. Wei Xi was about to use the incense burner to dry the ink stains on the essay that he had written. A scholar near him was still deep in thought. His face was flushed and his expression was a little squinted. He kept tearing at his clothes. The clothes that the scholar was wearing were old clothes. They were worn loosely. Naturally, they could not withstand such torment. Soon a big hole was torn. Wei Xi was speechless. Lu Shi heard the movement and turned his head. The Langjun had already taken off his clothes. He stood up from his seat with his back facing Lu Shi. Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 295. The clothes slid down and piled up at the feet. Everything was exposed. Naturally, everything in front of the body could be seen. The filthy thing even had the tendency to raise its head. The passing maids could not help but scream when they saw it. The scholars who were alarmed by the scream turned their heads to look for the source of the movement. The deputy examiners who liked to flaunt their seniority also stopped chatting and looked up. All of a sudden they felt like they were going blind. It was fine for the men. They had the parts that others had. So what if they saw it? At most, they would feel that it was an eyesore and spit at it for being immoral. However, the maids were different. They entered the royal palace. Strictly speaking, they were the emperor's women. Now that they saw the body of another strange man, and they were all virgins, they were suddenly frightened and screamed. It was already good of them to not be in a mess. Lu Shi's face was livid. When he saw the scholar's smug expression, he immediately guessed what was going on. The audience in the streaming room took advantage of the camera angle and zoomed in to see the situation of the assessment clearly. Just as they were picking and choosing and sucking up to all kinds of handsome men, the naked Lang Jun occupied most of the screen. White and plump breasts, slender waist, white and skinny legs that were a little blue. The audience in the streaming room, the sparse bullet screen instantly became turbulent, and the overwhelming number of words blocked the virtual screen. Lianyizi Huaji, oh my god, my eyes are going blind. Zifengjin Baobao, it's too much. My mother was watching the streaming just now. Suddenly, a high-definition breasts appeared. Now she suspects that I'm watching something dirty. She's going to the balcony to hit me with a clothes hanger. Help. Inyang Zuanshang, I'm the one who's miserable. My wife is starting to doubt my sexual orientation. Apart from these complaints and ridicule, the others were all copied and pasted to protect their eyes. Jiang Pingji was almost dumbfounded. She had just listened to an action blockbuster on the rockery. Now she came to peek at the assessment and encountered someone tearing his clothes and wanting to run away. She must have seen a fake assessment. The panic over there also attracted the attention of many people. They all ran to the octagonal pavilion to secretly see what was going on. As the person involved and the culprit of everything, the scholar was not ashamed. Instead, he was proud. The embarrassment and panic of the maids around him greatly pleased him. He threw his head back and laughed, blushing. All living beings come naked, this is their nature. Why are you all so alarmed? Wei Xi snorted coldly and said harshly, children are young and don't know shame. Are you the same? Etiquette, justice, honor, shame, and trust have been cultivated to perfection. That person heard Wei Xi's sarcasm and turned his head to take a look. Wow, this was really amazing. He felt as if he heard the sound of his heart blossoming. It was incomparably wonderful. The scholar squinted his eyes and his footsteps floated as he approached Wei Xi with a chuckle. I really didn't know that in this mediocre world, there's actually such a heavenly beauty. When I saw you, Lang Jun, I felt as if I had known you before, as if you were an old friend from Mount Wu. You look very familiar, can we be like brothers? In layman's terms it was, brother, I think we've had fun in our dreams before. Can we still go on a date? Nowadays, the southern style was prevalent in Dongqing. There were many Qi brothers, and many scholars even regarded it as a fashion. However, there were still many straight men in the world. They were rather disgusted by such actions that went against yin and yang. Due to the orthodox public opinion of the harmony of yin and yang, although there were many sworn brothers, most of them would do it in secret. Very few of them would confess their love to another man in public, not to mention that after eating too much of the hanshi powder, one's brain would turn over and one's clothes would be taken off. One would flirt with someone of the same gender. Wei Xi's expression was completely unsightly. What did it mean to be an old friend from Mount Wu? Did he still want to be like brothers? The seats of all the scholars were fixed, so Master Yuanjing's students and disciples did not gather together. Hearing the commotion and seeing that Wei Xi was actually being teased by a libertine who had taken drugs, his face instantly darkened and he was very angry. Who would have thought that someone would be so daring to take hanshi powder at the assessment site? It was fine if he used it, but he was so excited that he forgot where he was. This was the place for assessment, not an ordinary gathering. Although he was angry, if Wei Xi was really offended and taken advantage of by this fellow, how would his reputation be in the future? Thinking of this, a few scholars from Langyi Academy went forward to stop him. However, they were quite far away from him. The scholar who was high was only 3 to 4 steps away from Wei Xi. Comparing them, it was obvious who would be the first to seduce Wei Xi. Lu Shi was so angry that his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He clenched his teeth and said, "Guards, take this person away." In order not to disturb the scholar's assessment, the guards who were an eyesore were all waiting outside. It would take some time for them to come in. Wei Xi restrained the anger on his face. His gaze was cold as if he was looking at a dead person. With a cold face, he stood up, picked up the writing table with both hands and swung it directly at the scholar. He did it in one go. Everyone was speechless. Wei Xi looked down and said, "Immoral." His hand was still holding onto the writing table. No, it should be said that half of the writing table and the other half was hanging on the scholar's face. Looking at the broken writing table, then looking at the scholar's face that was covered in blood, many people secretly shuddered. If the writing table had been smashed on their faces, wouldn't their faces be flattened so that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them? Wei Xi's fingernails were neatly trimmed, but because he used too much force, his fingertips were pale. His fingers used force and his knuckles were distinct. The veins on the back of his hands were bulging. It was obvious that his heart was not as calm as he looked. At this moment the guards rushed over. Wuxia raised his head and glanced at Lu Shi and the scholars. He bowed with a calm expression, pursed his lips and left with a wave of his sleeves. He was very clear that there was no need for him to stay. Even if there was a reason for hitting someone during the assessment, it was very likely that he would be disqualified. Rather than continuing to stay and becoming a laughingstock, it was better to leave quickly to avoid being bullied and humiliated. Lu Shi bent over to pick up Wei Si's answer paper. Because the ink had not completely dried and the ink on the inkstone on the writing table had spilled, a lot of the content was dyed black. Lu Shi shook the paper and took the incense burner to dry the ink. Tsk, what a pity. Lu Shi pointed at the scholar coldly. Drag this disgraceful person away. Wei Si was at least high-spirited and took the initiative to leave. However, the scholar who made a mistake and caused trouble was personally ordered by Lu Shi to drag him away. Comparing the two, no one would be bothered about Wei Si injuring someone. They would only feel pity that the child was unlucky. This was only one of the reasons. More importantly, Lu Shi's action had almost negated everything about the scholar. His scholarly reputation was completely ruined. After being hit in the face with the writing table, the intense pain caused the scholar's light-headed head to return to the human world from heaven. There was still a pleasant aftertaste in his body. However, when he saw everything around him clearly and the cold wind blew, he realized that he was naked and almost fainted. Chapter 296. His brain had cooled down and he no longer had that unruly drive. It was late autumn and when the wind blew, he felt a chill all over his body. His legs were trembling and his legs were trembling. He was afraid. Lu Shi saw the change in his expression and sneered coldly, "The evaluation is related to the country and the future of Dongqing. It is such a serious and sacred matter and someone took off his clothes and ran around in public without any sense of shame. He has learned all the words of a saint. It is really an eye-opener." The scholars were as quiet as chickens. The frightened maids knelt on the ground and trembled. Seeing that the guards did not take action, Lu Shi said in a calm tone, "Drag him away. Do you really not understand human language?" A few deputy examiners were about to plead for mercy. Although they also felt that the scholar had gone overboard, consuming hanshi powder had become a trend in the upper class of Dongqing. It was an elegant matter. Even if the reaction was over the top, it was because the powder was not used properly. This kind of matter was not a special case and should be dealt with according to the circumstances. Muddle-headed. Before they could speak, Lu Shi had already scolded. Although he did not mention names, how could those old foxes not know that he was scolding them? Instantly, their expressions were as colorful as a palette of colors. The guards lowered their heads but in the end they still dragged the man away. Lu Shi's face was cold. He smoked and dried Wei Si's examination paper and folded it into his sleeve. The audience in the streaming room could not hear what Lu Shi scolded, but looking at his expression, they knew that the streamer's father was really angry. More importantly, no matter how one looked at it, that scholar's action seemed like he was high on drugs. Librarian, that's strange. Why do I feel that there is something wrong with the scholar's behavior just now? Daming Iguan, it's not just not right, he was basically drugged. What's the difference between this and taking off one's clothes in the examination hall with the intention of touching or molesting another student? No matter who you are, you must be thrown out. I don't know if I have seen too many court intrigues, but I feel that this matter is not that simple. Maybe this student was plotted against. In an instant he thought of a court intrigue. Lao Siji Lianming, I think he ate too much hanshi powder. How is this a plot? Earth's most handsome man, hanshi powder? What was that? Lao Siji Lianming, hanshi powder, also known as five stones powder, is a type of poison that can cause addiction and hallucinations. After consumption, the poison will spread and the body will develop a huge internal heat. Long-term consumption will result in chronic poisoning. But the ancients believed that after the consumption of hanshi powder, it would have the effect of clearing one's mind, and it would be as if the gods were helping one to compose poems. It was probably because of this that the naughty brat took the pill during the assessment. Nougat? Isn't this poison? Jiang Pingji could not help but raise her eyebrows when she saw the contents of the bullet screen. She knew about it. Hanshi powder was a popular luxury item among the aristocrats of Dongqing. In Lu Shi's memory, he had seen many scholars in Hejian County drinking hanshi powder to liven things up during gatherings. Another member of the audience searched for the information of hanshi powder on Baidu, and copied and pasted a whole bunch of information, which could be considered as a form of education for those who didn't know about it. Lao Siji Lianming, Hanshi powder is addictive, but from a certain aspect, it is scarier than drugs. Jiang Pingji glanced at it and put it down disinterestedly. The audience in the streaming room belonged to the modern era. To them, Hanshi powder was still very scary. However, Jiang Pingji grew up in the interstellar era where technology was highly advanced. The various kinds of drugs that were once feared by people in her eyes were not qualified to enter her sights. Bingtang Ningming, that's scary. If one accidentally becomes addicted to this thing, wouldn't he be crippled? It wasn't easy to get rid of drugs in the ancient era. Think about our Chinese country, think about opium. If this thing were to be widely spread, the consequences would be unthinkable. This bullet screen gained the support of many viewers. Host V, there's no need to be so worried, Hanshi powder can only be spread in a small area. This thing is very expensive, ordinary people can't afford to use it, which prevents the possibility of it being spread widely. After consuming Hanshi powder, one still needs to go through a very complicated process to disperse the excess internal heat in the body. If there's a mistake during the dispersion, it could lead to death. The people can't afford it. Even so, the harm of Hanshi powder can't be ignored. In the current ancient era, the upper-class society is in low spirits, the atmosphere of society will also be led astray, the unlucky ones are the lower-class people. Jiang Pingji looked at the scholars participating in the assessment, her brows slightly furrowed, she suddenly lost interest to continue watching. Hanshi powder indeed couldn't enter her eyes, because based on the physical qualities of humans in the future, it's basically impossible to use Hanshi powder to cause people to become addicted. But the people in the ancient era were different, they were too weak, those aristocrats who were spoiled since young were even weaker. Once one becomes addicted, it would be difficult to quit, probably no one has the willpower to quit. The noble scholars, they have the money to buy Hanshi powder, they will be fine as long as they continue to consume it, why would they go through hardships to quit? In the current pyramid society where illiterates are everywhere, the influence of the elites on the lower class is too big, the decadence of the elites will cause the whole world to be decadent, they are useless, it will also cause the atmosphere of the whole society to be foul. She pursed her lips into a straight line, she didn't alert anyone, she quietly left the octagonal pavilion. After such an episode, Lu Shi didn't have the mood to host the assessment. He waited for all the scholars to finish answering their questions, he ordered people to collect all the papers of the scholars. For the sake of fairness, the names of the scholars were all covered with white cloths, they will be assessed slowly. Han Yu's face was full of worry, Zixiao, this time isn't it too much of a loss? Why did he encounter such an unlucky thing? He didn't look at the almanac when he went out? Lu Jing said, Zixiao is always meticulous, I hope this incident won't bring too much of a blow to him. Their master, Master Yuanjing, was not surprised at all that Wei Ci left the assessment halfway. Instead, he smiled calmly, I know about this, you don't have to worry too much, Zixiao already has a plan. Wei Ci never thought of serving Dongqing, what meaning does the assessment result have to him? If it wasn't for Master Yuanjing's request, Wei Ci wouldn't be there today. Jiang Pingji walked back and coincidentally met Feng Jin, who came out to look for her. This is an important place for the royal family, didn't I tell you not to wander around? Feng Jin looked her up and down, he was secretly relieved to make sure that there was nothing unusual about her. She didn't seem to have caused any trouble. I just wanted to watch the assessment from afar, there are people around. If I did something wrong, I can't be the only one to be in trouble. Jiang Pingji glanced at the other scholars and noble ladies, indicating to Feng Jin that she was innocent. I'm afraid that you don't know the rules here, right? It was not easy for him to take care of a naughty child and injured person. Don't be fooled by the beauty of the royal garden, who knows what demons and monsters are hiding in the dark. If you accidentally ruin someone's plan, you might lose your head. Jiang Pingji walked to Feng Jin's side, they walked side by side on the narrow path, they were quite a distance away from the others. It seems that you are very experienced. I just found Wuma Jun and a girl named Inyina in the rockery cave, TSK. It was intense. Is this a big deal? Chapter 297. Inyina. This name doesn't belong to a woman from Dongqing at all. Is she from a different tribe? Feng Jin's expression changed, and an ominous premonition flashed in his heart. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and pointed to the north. She smiled meaningfully. Feng Jin understood, but he was not happy that he had guessed the other party's identity. Instead, his face turned pale. The decree of marriage has been issued. She's the fourth sister-in-law of His Highness. How dare Wuma Jun, brother-in-law and sister-in-law are having an affair. Does Wuma Jun know what he's doing? Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes contemptuously. Wuma Jun is carrying forward the virtues passed down from his ancestors. Besides, Anyina has ill intentions after marrying into the royal family. She seduced Wuma Jun and he has his own plans. Won't they be together? According to Wuma Jun's ambition, even if Anyina did not seduce him on purpose, would he be able to protect his belt? Neither of them were good people. Feng Jin hesitated and did not move forward. His heart was full of struggle. This matter? Jiang Pingji said in a low voice. Why are you so worried about the scandal of the royal family? Your father has retired from his official post and is waiting for the situation to change. Do you still want to risk your life for Dongqing? Even if you say that Anyina and Wuma Jun are having an affair, what evidence can you show? The marriage between the northern borderline and Dongqing is already set in stone. Any obstacles in between will be eradicated. After listening to her, his expression kept changing. After a long time he let out a long sigh. Forget it. This matter indeed has nothing to do with me. Feng Jin was very clear about Wuma Jun's ambition. Feng Jin could more or less guess his purpose of seducing the princess of the northern borderline, Anyina. However, that person was only ambitious but had no brains. He did not see the big picture. That was what Feng Jin despised the most about Wuma Jun. Getting in touch with the royal family of the northern borderline through Anyina was tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. He would be bitten to death. Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at Feng Jin's side profile. She said, "This matter has nothing to do with you. Let me tell you something that is related to you." Feng Jin's heart skipped a beat. He asked her without changing his expression. "What is it?" Jiang Pingji said, "During the assessment just now, a scholar consumed hanshi powder and took off all his clothes in front of everyone. Yes, you didn't hear wrongly. He stripped naked in front of all the scholars, my father, and the other deputy examiners. He even flirted with Master Yuanjing's disciple, Wei Zixiao." Feng Jin was stunned. His eyes widened involuntarily. This is simply absurd. Jiang Pingji told Feng Jin about it as a joke and teased him, "You should be glad that you didn't go for the assessment because of your arm injury. Otherwise, perhaps the one that libertine has his eyes on would be your beauty, Feng Huayu." Why did he feel like his hands were itching to beat the brat in front of him? Jiang Pingji burst into laughter. Her eyes were filled with a relaxed smile. "Forget it. Since you're so honest, I'll stop teasing you." Feng Jin's expression was stiff. He looked a little angry, but Jiang Pingji smiled from the bottom of her heart. The two of them walked through the veranda and looked from afar. They seemed to be chatting and laughing. When they were about to leave the garden, Jiang Pingji noticed a strange gaze. She subconsciously stopped smiling and looked at the source of the gaze. In her line of sight, there was only a disappearing piece of cloth. "Did you see someone you know?" Feng Jin asked her. "Sort of, but he's very guarded against me. I don't know how I offended him." Jiang Pingji shook her head. If Wei Ci liked to avoid her, then so be it. She wanted to see how long he could keep his secret. "Huayu, how much do you know about Langya County?" Feng Jin retracted his gaze and looked in the direction where Jiang Pingji was looking at. He didn't see anyone. "Langya County? I forgot that you're going to Langya with Master Yuanjing to study. It's better to be prepared. You should do your homework and understand the situation of the aristocratic families in Langya." Feng Jin smiled. He thought Jiang Pingji was worried about studying in the future. Langya County is a place where military strategists fight for it. It's also a place full of spiritual energy and nurtures many outstanding talents. It's a place where aristocratic families gather. Jiang Pingji nodded. She knew all that. "I heard that there are many aristocratic families in Langya County. They're not to be trifled with. Hejian County was rich in beauties, while Langya County was rich in scholars and heroes. Many famous scholars were basically from Langya. The two were completely different in Dongqing." Feng Jin comforted Jiang Pingji. "They're indeed not to be trifled with. But as long as you know your place, no one will deliberately make things difficult for you for the sake of Lu County Chief. Moreover, when you enter Langya Academy, Master Yuanjing will protect you. What are you afraid of? As long as the friend beside her didn't make a fuss, she would definitely have a good life in Langya County." Jiang Pingji asked again, "Then, have you heard of the Wei family of Langya?" Feng Jin listened and frowned. He rummaged in his mind for a long time. "The Wei family of Langya? I have some impression of it. If I remember correctly, the branch of the Wei family of Langya is a branch that branched off from the Wei family of Bianzhou not long after the founding of the Xia dynasty. But this branch has been declining for a long time. It's getting worse with each generation. Bianzhou was located in Zhongzhou. The Wei family of Bianzhou was considered a first-class aristocratic family in Zhongzhou. Do you know the current situation of the Wei family of Langya? Jiang Pingji asked. I vaguely heard that the branch of the Wei family of Langya has returned to the Wei family of Bianzhou and returned to the main clan. Although it's said to be returning, it's actually just living under someone else's roof. But if they don't do that, they may completely fall from grace and become a commoner. The most important part of the assessment was family background. It took up a lot of points. Commoner families could only be inferior. If they returned to the main clan, they could enjoy the shade under a big tree. After all, they were an ancestor. Regardless of how they lived, at least they would be a well-known aristocratic family and not a commoner family. Jiang Pingji frowned and said, Huayu, do you mean that the Wei family of Langya has moved back to Zhongzhou? If that was the case, Wei Ci shouldn't be from the Wei family of Langya. Was it just a coincidence of the surname? It should be. Feng Jin shook his head and said with pity, it's impossible for the branch to return to the main clan under normal circumstances. The Wei family of Langya made such a choice because they were at the end of their rope. They had no choice but to do so. Why is Lanting interested in this? She shook her head and said, it's nothing. I'm just asking out of curiosity. The two of them talked as they walked. When they returned to the banquet, they watched the singing and dancing for a while. Jiang Pingji saw someone taking hanshi powder in public not far away. His expression was one of enjoyment. She was startled and suddenly thought of something. Huayu, do you know when hanshi powder became popular in Dongqing? Chapter 298. Isn't there an approximate time? Jiang Pingji had some guesses in her heart, but she didn't have any concrete evidence. She had read so many books before, and there were indeed some records about hanshi powder. According to unofficial historical records, in the previous dynasty, there was a wandering necromancer who presented a magical prescription to the emperor of the Xia kingdom that could extend one's lifespan and strengthen one's body. It could allow a man to have sufficient yang energy and be vigorous in bed. That prescription was hanshi powder, and it had the effect of treating typhoid. Before the 5 kingdoms separated into Xia, this hanshi powder had always been a secret prescription of the palace. It wasn't leaked to the public and only the emperor could enjoy it. Later on, when the 5 kingdoms separated into Xia, the hanshi powder that was once regarded as a god disappeared without a trace. When it reappeared, it became a popular trend pursued by the nobles. Feng Jin frowned and shook his head, saying, I'm not sure about this. If Lanting is curious, I'll go back and check it out for you. Jiang Pingji nodded, then I'll have to trouble you. Feng Jin turned his head and thought about it. He felt that Jiang Pingji's sudden questions were a little weird. What's the problem with this hanshi powder? Jiang Pingji sneered, the problem is huge. Take a look, those who have been consuming hanshi powder for a long time, which one of them still has energy? They are muddle-headed all day as if they are going to meet their ancestors at any time. They don't have the heart to do proper work, and their actions are absurd. Their temperament is even more unpredictable. Now after consuming hanshi powder, they still strip in public. Under normal circumstances, who would strip naked and expose their body to outsiders? Feng Jin had always heard about how good hanshi powder was, and how comfortable it was after consuming it, but he had never touched it. If he were to indulge in hanshi powder like those idle playboys, not to mention anything else, his father Feng Ren would be the first to not let him off. Hearing Jiang Pingji's reminder, he came back to his senses, and vaguely understood something. Hanshi powder is addictive. Jiang Pingji said with a cold face. She did not care about such outdated things, but the physical qualities of the people in ancient times were too poor. The possibility of addiction was high. If you take it for a long time and want to quit, the process is extremely painful. Ordinary people can't bear it. Feng Jin's expression turned a little strange. But this hanshi powder is mostly used by nobles, the common people will not be implicated, Jiang Pingji sneered. Look at what you're saying. It's as if the people at the helm are the people. Feng Jin was speechless. After a while he said, Jin will investigate this matter when I get back. Jiang Pingji lowered her eyes. She wasn't sure if the hanshi powder was a conspiracy, but she was sure that this thing was like a catalyst, which stimulated the original hidden danger. After leaving the royal courtyard, she sat alone in the carriage, her face cold as she flipped through the information about hanshi powder that the viewers in the live streaming room had found. It was almost the same as what she saw in the unofficial history. In the dimension of the viewers in the live streaming room, hanshi powder was initially used to treat typhoid. But because of some people who were courting death, they changed the prescription, causing the medicine to become poisonous. It was spread to the aristocrats and became a popular consumption trend. In the current dimension, Hanshi powder was presented to the emperor by the wandering necromancers as a good prescription for health, but the emperor of Xia used it wantonly. After the 5 countries divided into Xia, the secret prescription of Hanshi powder was also spread to the hands of a certain country. This harmful thing? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but shake her head. Back at the Feng residence, Takshu had already prepared hot soup and clean clothes. Jiang Pingji went to take a bath. Her long hair was still wet. Takshu used a dry cloth to wipe her hair and absorb the water. Xiaoyu, help me get the Great Universal Geographical Map. Jiang Pingji unfolded the Great Universal Geographical Map. The contents on it were personally copied by her. There were many small words on it. Her long hair was almost dry. Jiang Pingji let Takshu leave and said to Suku, "Father is probably going to retire." Suku was shocked after hearing that. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at her. Master is going to retire? But how old was Lu Shi? Ichi wasn't even 40 yet. He had just passed 30 years of age. Why was he thinking of retiring? Hu County is a hot potato. If it wasn't for father's strong hand, how could he have defended it until now? Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed with coldness. The 2 prefectures near Hu County had a food shortage. Who wouldn't be jealous if they managed to survive with just Hu County? Not only will the aristocrats be jealous, but the emperor is even more jealous. I think he's going to cause trouble. Father already had the intention to retire before he came to Shangjing. I think this matter is going to end like this. Su Ke frowned and said softly, but if Master loses Hu County, he won't be able to rest easy without someone to rely on. After all, although Lu Shi didn't kill all the aristocrats in Hu County, he offended a lot of them. Jiang Pingji said, that depends on how you choose. Hu County's terrain is easy to attack and difficult to defend. Moreover, the military is weak. If it's Dongqing, this place will definitely become a fat piece of meat that everyone covets. What's the difference between this and a toddler carrying gold in a busy market? Rather than having food in your hands and not being able to protect it, it's better to give it up temporarily and move to another place as soon as possible. After hearing that, Suku was silent for a while and said, I think that if you submit a memorial to retire, you will most likely be promoted to a prefecture magistrate. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Hu County was already a big county that produced food. It was the best piece of land in the whole of Dongqing. Lu Shi had spent several years to manage the county to this state. If he retired now, people would only think that the emperor was too greedy. In order to stop people from gossiping, if Lu Shi said he wanted to retire, he would most likely be appointed as a prefecture magistrate to show the emperor's benevolence. Although it was a demotion, it was better to have a good reputation. I think so too. Currently, there are 6 prefectures and 21 counties in Dongqing. Only Yuanzhou is still lacking a prefecture magistrate. When he heard Yuanzhou, Suka's face suddenly turned cold. But this place in Yuanzhou was located to the north of Dongqing and bordered the northern borderline. There were 2 counties, Shangyu County and Changhai County. Archiguan Rang was from Shangyu County. The 6 cities that were lost were all in Shangyu County. Now, there were still 3 cities in the hands of the northern borderline. That was not all. Due to the many years of war between the northern borderline and Dongqing, Yuanzhou was already in a mess and the population was low. Now that Dongqing and the northern borderline were connected by marriage and Nanxing came to borrow troops, according to the emperor's idiotic character, he might transfer the troops guarding the border. When that time came, Yuanzhou would have to face the covetous eyes of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. It was not easy to be the prefecture magistrate of Yuanzhou. However, it was precisely because it was not easy that Lu Shi went to Yuanzhou to seek the greatest benefits. Jiang Pingji had also been eyeing this place at first. Only in Yuanzhou can he openly recruit soldiers and buy horses. After all, even if the 2 countries are connected by marriage, the 3 cities of Shangyu County are still in the hands of the northern borderline. The land is indispensable, Jiang Pingji said. Suka listened carefully. Yuanzhou has another important advantage. She wrote 4 words, the aristocrats are scarce. The aristocrats are scarce, which means that they will be subject to fewer restrictions and constraints. Suka thought about it seriously and faintly understood Jiang Pingji's choice. Yuanzhou seemed to be in danger, but it was actually a great opportunity. Yuanzhou and Hu County share a border. Father has been operating in Hu County for so many years, so he must have a backup plan. The county chief sent by the imperial court will not be able to control the entire Hu County in a short period of time. In other words, Hu County is still secretly in father's hands. Yuanzhou's soldiers and Hu County's provisions. The combination of the two was what Jiang Pingji wanted. Apart from that, there is another important reason. Chongzhou is rich in sandalwood. Chapter 299. Su Ku was stunned for a moment. He did not understand the connection between Chongzhou's abundance of red sandalwood and her preference for Chongzhou. Don't underestimate this Bai Tan. Jiang Pingji smiled and revealed a hint of gentleness. In the beginning my goal was not Chongzhou. But because of this Bai Tan I changed my mind. If father is appointed as the magistrate of Chongzhou, many plans can be started. Jiang Pingji wanted to disrupt the current system of passing on knowledge. The first problem was not facing the censure of the aristocratic families, but the carrier of the books. Our bamboo slips were heavy and the cost was high. Therefore, even if a family of a few people worked for a lifetime, they would not be able to support a scholar. Although bamboo paper was good, it had some shortcomings. The annual output of the paper workshop was limited. Apart from the need to control the output due to its rarity, the other reason was the limited raw materials. The forest in Hejing County was dense, but there were very few bamboo forests. The quality of the bamboo would also affect the quality of the bamboo paper. Taking the means of transportation in ancient times as an example, in order to save as much money as possible, the production materials had to be sourced locally. Therefore, most of the bamboo paper produced by the paper workshop was sold to various aristocratic families. The other portion was used for their own use. The scale of production had never been expanded. Jiang Pingji's ambition was not limited to this. The output of bamboo paper could not satisfy her needs. Naturally, she had to find another way. Jiang Pingji searched through all kinds of wood and found the wood that was the closest to the green sandalwood tree. The audience in the streaming room said that they used rice paper in ancient times, and one of the raw materials for rice paper was the green sandalwood tree. Our red sandalwood has a hard and dense texture. It is tough and resistant to wear and tear. It can be made into sturdy and durable farming tools, furniture, and axles. Its stem, bark, and branches are even more useful. Jiang Pingji said in a low voice. She wrote a word on the table with her finger. Paper. Su Ku understood, and his eyes seemed to light up a few degrees. Really? Jiang Pingji nodded. The paper workshop's technology for making bamboo paper was very mature. Even if they changed the raw materials, they could make new paper after some experimentation. The raw materials were cheap, and with the support of mature technology, this meant that the cost of the new paper would be much lower, at least cheaper than it was now. Su Ku rubbed his hands together in agitation. Once he thought about how he could buy a lot of bamboo paper at a low price, his heart trembled. But if Chongzhou accidentally falls into the hands of others, then wouldn't my plan be, Jiang Pingji said, therefore I still need to inform my father about this matter. Try to think of a way to operate it and take over Chongzhou openly. Based on the current situation, it would not be difficult to take down Chongzhou. What he was afraid of was an accident along the way. I do need to discuss this matter with Master. Su Ku secretly took a few deep breaths to suppress the excitement in his heart. Coming from a commoner's family, no one knew better than him how hard it was to learn to read and write. If it wasn't for the fact that his teacher was a good person and took pity on Su Ku's talent, he wouldn't have been able to study at all. If the Langjun in front of him could really accomplish such a magnificent feat, he, Su Ku, would be willing to be his slave for the rest of his life. Also there's one more thing. Jiang Pingji lowered her eyelids, stood up, and took out a dark green box from a book box. There were a few stacks of paper in it. They were all drawn by Jiang Pingji herself. She unfolded them and placed them in front of Su Ku. Take a look at this. What do you think? Su Ku did not understand. He opened it up and read it carefully. He was a little confused and did not understand what it meant. However, the audience in the streaming room understood. Paper was not enough. Copying books by hand was too exhausting, so printing was a must. Librarian, is the streamer going to use printing in secret? Movable type printing or engraving printing? Lao CG Lianming, of course it's movable type printing. But engraving printing is better than movable type printing in certain situations. Ardying Kuemo Wang, I'm disappointed. I wanted to see if the streamer could create a printing machine or something. I didn't expect it to be printing. Artsaitang Dafin Anti, TSK, a tall building starts from the ground. No matter how good the streamer is, she's just one person. The technology in that world is just like that. According to Diane Kuimo Wang, you should be complaining about why the streamer doesn't build a space carrier. Our paper and printing. Jiang Pingji had thought about these two things a long time ago. Arshi had a workshop to make bamboo paper. The technology was ready-made, so she only needed to think about how to save money and choose the right raw materials. RAS for printing? Arhihi, she only knew about printing machines. That thing was an extremely old antique in her world. It was something that only existed in the history books. How would Jiang Pingji know about the mechanical parts and structure? Besides, even if she knew about it, the material technology in that world did not support her making it. Since there was no way to get a printing machine, she could only settle for the next best thing and choose a more stupid method. She engraved the characters needed for the book in advance, then typeset the characters for printing. She could not tell much about one or two books, but if she printed thousands of books, the efficiency would naturally be incomparable. Arsu could put down the drawing paper in confusion and said, "Langjun, this?" Jiang Pingji took out her private seal and stamped it on the paper. Then she raised her eyebrows at Su Ke. You still don't understand?" Ran idea flashed through Su Ke's mind. He hurriedly picked up the drawing paper. He was so excited that he did not know how to react. It's not that simple. It's too early to be excited." Jiang Pingji shook her head and said, "At first I wanted to use clay as a mold, but firing it would take a lot of time. I still have to figure out the composition of the clay to prevent the characters from changing shape. If I want to fire it, I'll need to build a kiln." Suka thought about it and said, "Then I'll look for other materials. Copper, iron, wood. Using copper and iron as raw materials to make a mold would cost a lot of materials. Wood was not bad, but it would also cause problems such as deformation, moisture, and worms." Jiang Pingji lowered her eyelids and said, "Cedar is actually not bad. It's not easy to get worms, the texture is fine, and it won't change shape too much. If we choose a dry place, it should be stored for a long time. But we still have to try it to know the effect." The key was that the wood was cheap, so it would be easier to carve. Suka nodded solemnly. If these two things were done, not only would he be famous for a long time, but at least he would benefit countless students who were eager to study. Work for the present, benefit for the future. Put it away. When we really have a firm foothold, we'll take it one step at a time. Jiang Pingji stood up and patted Suka's shoulder. Lu Shi and the other examiners had to examine the examination papers in a heavily guarded place. He was the main examiner, and the other examiners assisted him. They graded all the papers with names on them. They listed them as excellent, medium, and poor, and then calculated the grades of the other items. Chapter 300. Wei Si held a weak candle in his right hand and walked silently through the corridor. The moonlight elongated his shadow on the door. Master? Wei Si stopped in his tracks and saw a figure sitting upright in front of him. Master Yuanjing tilted his head and waved at Wei Si. "Zhixiao, come to me." Seeing the cloak draped over Master Yuanjing's shoulders, Wei Si went forward and sat beside him. He placed the lamp aside. How long has Master been waiting here?" Wei Si did not need to ask to know that Master Yuanjing was waiting for him. It's not important." Master Yuanjing said plainly with a hint of a smile. "Zhixiao is not a reckless person. I've heard about today's assessment from Yumo and Xiaoyin. Hitting someone with a book in public even when you were 3 or 5 years old, you wouldn't have done this." Wei Si's face was slightly red. He lowered his head and admitted his mistake. "Your disciple knows his mistake. Please punish me, Master." Master Yuanjing shook his head and asked, "Why should I punish him? I don't think you did anything wrong. On the contrary, you played very well. It wasn't as if he had beaten someone to death. That scholar's actions were indeed too much. Who wouldn't be infuriated?" Master Yuanjing nagged, "I'm not here to scold you today. I just want to tell you that it's okay to be more casual. Your personality is too serious and your thoughts are heavy. You like to keep everything to yourself and hide it from everyone. To put it bluntly, other people aren't like roundworms in your stomach. How would they know what you're thinking?" Wei Si remained silent with his head lowered. No one knew if he heard it or not. Master Yuanjing massaged his numb leg and said casually, "There are some things that you should say if you want to say them. Your disciple does not dare to say." Wei Si had a lot of things he wanted to say, but he could not say them no matter how hard he tried. Master Yuanjing smiled. "Zhixiao, there are many taboos for strategists. One of them is not to use your own heart to guess the intentions of others. I know why you don't dare to say it. From what you can see, you already have the answer in your heart, so there's no need to say it. Isn't that so? Wuxia remained silent. Our master Yuanjing smiled helplessly. I don't deny your ability to read people's minds, but I'm afraid you'll miscalculate one person. Even though Master Yuanjing did not name the person, Wuxia had a tacit understanding with this teacher. He knew who it was. Only by thoroughly understanding it can we have a flawless plan. Master Yuanjing pouted his lips at Wuxia and teased, in the future we'll see each other all the time. If you treat her with the prejudice you had in the past, I'm afraid that the truth will be revealed even faster. The past is gone like smoke. You should observe everything around you with a new attitude. Don't be blinded by the past. If you can't do this, you'll still lose and lose even more miserably. Wuxia's expression finally changed. He looked at Yuanjing with some shock and avoidance in his eyes. Our master Yuanjing laughed softly and said, I'm old but I'm not blind yet. After a long time Wuxia broke the silence. Teacher, I want to leave for a few days. Our master Yuanjing said, because you want to escape? Wuxia shook his head and smiled bitterly. If I were so cowardly and unable to face reality, I would have moved to Zhongzhou with my people. Why would I stay in Langyi and come to Shangjing? It was an accident to meet her. It's not that I can't accept it, but when I saw her in her teens, I didn't have any determination. Instead, I felt a little lost. It was as if I never knew her. Wuxia, who had always been a man of few words, was now like a child. He poured out all the thoughts that he had been suppressing in his heart for a long time in front of Yuanjing. Our master Yuanjing played the role of a listener. He could vaguely guess Wuxia's experience, but he didn't expect that this child had so much conflict and pain in his heart. If you feel uncomfortable, leave for a while and sort out your thoughts, Master Yuanjing said. Wuxia shook his head and said, I'm fine. You don't have to worry. Now that I look at it, many things are different. People are different too, especially her. If I continue to be tied down by the memories of the past, I'm afraid my life will be worse than before. Ri's goal was to leave his name in the annals of history as an honorable strategist, not as a lowly one. Not only was she ridiculed and criticized by the later generations, but it also became a stain on her. Ichi used to think that the former caused him pain, but when the sword pierced his throat, he suddenly realized that the latter was even more unacceptable. Our master Yuanjing looked at Wuxia for a long time and sighed. It's good that you think this way. Get to know people again. Old people have new faces. Wuxia secretly clenched his fist. I understand. On the other side, Lucy returned to the Feng residence in a carriage with exhaustion. The rankings of the assessment had already been arranged. He made a copy of the list and stored it in a letter. He sealed it and presented it to the emperor. As for whether the emperor would read it or not, that was not something he could interfere with. The results would be released in 3 days. After the release of the results, it would be the Qianglin banquet. As the general evaluation officer, he had to show up. After that, there was basically nothing for him to do. The guest room was brightly lit. Lucy saw his daughter's maid, Takshu, waiting at the door with a lantern in her hand. Lanting didn't come back tonight? He gathered his cloak to block the cold wind from the outside world. Seeing Lucy return, Takshu's face lit up and she walked forward. Master, your servant has been waiting for you here on Longjuan's orders. Lucy frowned and said seriously, why is Lanting looking for me? Lucy had always valued his daughter. She must have something important to tell him and could not be delayed. Langjun didn't say. He just asked me to tell you that Langjun is waiting in your room. Lucy nodded as he walked. He wondered why his daughter was looking for him. At the door of the room, there was indeed a lantern in the room. Jiang Pingji was reading a book under the candlelight. Father. Jiang Pingji looked up when she heard the noise. I heard from Takshu that you were looking for me? Lucy hurriedly closed the door to prevent the cold wind from blowing away the warm air in the room. Father, you haven't submitted your resignation report, have you? Jiang Pingji asked. Of course not. I plan to submit it after the Qianglin banquet. She sat opposite Jiang Pingji and saw that she was holding a universal geographical map. Lanting, do you have any good suggestions? Father, you want to be a rich man, but I'm unfilial. I'd like to ask you to work hard for a while longer. Lucy raised his eyebrows. You're not going to submit the report? Jiang Pingji shook her head and whispered, that's not the case. I want you to try your best to take over Chongzhou. Chongzhou? Lucy thought about it and understood. You want to take the opportunity to gather troops? Or Chapter 301. Lu Shi did not let Jiang Pingji explain in detail. He raised his hand to stop her from speaking. He closed his eyes slightly. The candlelight shone on his eyelashes, casting two small shadows that covered the green in his eyes. You don't have to explain too much. The Feng residence may not be completely safe. Lu Shi did not know Jiang Pingji's perception. He was afraid that the walls had ears. His expression softened. Whatever you want to do, there is nothing I won't do. Chongzhou is actually a good place. Jiang Pingji opened her mouth as if something was stuck in her throat. She could not spit it out or swallow it. Based on Lu Shi's years of experience in officialdom, how could he not see the danger in Chongzhou? Lu Shi saw her expression and laughed. He raised his hand to rub the top of her head. He said warmly, "You don't have to worry about me. Hu County was so chaotic back then, but didn't I survive until now? The northern borderline is ambitious and has been eyeing Chongzhou for a long time. But since they are connected by marriage with the royal family, they will at least pretend to be obedient. Before the princess of the northern borderline turns the royal family upside down, the northern borderline will not make a move." In other words, Chongzhou was still in a relatively safe state for the next few years. It could be governed and developed in peace. However, after this deadline, Chongzhou would have to face the covetous eyes of the three tribes of the northern borderline. It would welcome the trampling of their armored cavalry. Jiang Pingji clenched her fists, pursed her lips and solemnly promised. "Father, please work hard for 2 years. I will take care of you until you are 100 years old." Lu Shi could not help but laugh. His expression became lively. "You still don't understand. Although Chongzhou is threatened by the northern borderline, it will be a very safe place for the next 2 years." He shook his head and carefully analyzed the situation for Jiang Pingji. Even if Nanxing can avoid the destruction of the country, they will have to cede land and pay compensation. They will have to ask for peace and pay tribute. The south will not be stable. In contrast, the north is more comfortable. Even if the northern borderline is ambitious, it will be a matter for a few years. Lu Shi was only going to be the magistrate of Chongzhou. He would oversee Chongzhou for 2 years. When the world was really chaotic, Jiang Pingji would take over. The risk was not high, but it was more frightening. Lu Shi understood this logic. After a while, he took out a neatly folded piece of paper from his sleeve. It was stained with ink. Some words could not be read clearly. "What is this?" Jiang Pingji took it and looked at it. Lu Shi said, "Master Yuanjing's disciple wrote about the girl who was teased and left in anger." Jiang Pingji looked at the assessment from afar and naturally knew who Lu Shi was referring to. "Why did father bring his exam paper out?" As she spoke, she carefully unfolded the piece of paper. Just from the handwriting, one would think that it was a gentle and delicate young lady from a noble family. "If this paper is seen by others, I'm afraid there will be trouble. Master Yuanjing is really a wonderful person. Sure enough, he accepts disciples based on fate." Lu Shi shook his head. Nowadays, a lot of people complained about the difficulty of studying. Some great Confucian scholars advocated and appealed to the common people to be able to read and read. However, those were just words. If such a thing really happened, those people would be the ones who resisted the most fiercely. Even if this was a beautiful article, just based on the meaning revealed in it, Wei Ci was useless. Jiang Pingji's interest was piqued. She read the article carefully. Although some words were covered by ink, she could guess the meaning of the full text. "I didn't know that he had a brain other than his face." Jiang Pingji smiled, folded the paper and stuffed it into her sleeve. Lu Shi choked on her words. What did Wei Ci do? Why didn't my daughter get along with him? Having a brain is useless. Who doesn't know how to talk on paper? Jiang Pingji curled her lips. So I need to observe him carefully. Her attention was something that Wei Ci could not avoid. Diske, I really want to see his horrified expression when he finds out the truth. Lu Shi came back to his senses. Wei Ci was born in the Wei family of Langya. Although he has fallen, he still has his pride. He may not be easily convinced by you. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows when she heard Lu Shi's words. I heard from Huayu that the Wei family has moved back to Zhongzhou, but Wei Ci is still in Dongqing. Because Feng Jin told her about the Wei family, she thought that Wei Ci was from a poor family or an ordinary farmer's family. Now that she looked at him, it seemed that he had a background. Lu Shi said uncertainly, maybe he's temporarily tied up for the assessment? If it's for the assessment, he wouldn't have written such a deviant paper. He obviously doesn't want to be selected. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, I'm not sure about other people, but I'm confident that I can take down Wuxia. They were coming for her, so where else could she run to? The father and son talked for 15 minutes. Jiang Pingji put on Lu Shi's cloak and went straight to her room. It was late autumn and the temperature was getting colder every day. Jiang Pingji tightened her cloak to block out the cold air outside. Taksha led the way in front with an orange lamp in her hand. The master and servant passed by the courtyard. Jiang Pingji suddenly felt a little cold water drip on her eyelashes. She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch it. It's raining? She looked up at the sky. The moon was as white as a jade plate hanging high in the sky. Taksha heard the movement and carefully identified it. She said, Langjun, it's snowing. Snowing? Jiang Pingji blinked and reached out to catch the white flowers falling from the sky. The snowflakes were very small, like fine silver beads. They melted into liquid when they fell on her palm, leaving only a little coldness. It's quite small. Jiang Pingji blinked her eyes and muttered in a low voice. It was the first time in her life that she had seen such gentle and harmless snow. In her memory, snow was supposed to fall in sheets or as hard as white pearls, crashing down from the sky. Taksha laughed, and her eyes curved into the shape of a crescent moon. I guess this is the first snow of the year. It's still early. Even if it snows, it will be very small. In another 1 or 2 months it will really snow. The sky and the earth will be the same color. It will be very beautiful. Jiang Pingji had Lu Shi's memory. Naturally, she knew when it usually snowed. The snow this year was indeed a little early. The snow was not heavy. Jiang Pingji went back to her room and drank a bowl of cold ginger soup. She took off her clothes and went to sleep. When she woke up the next day, as soon as she opened the door, she was hit by a cold air that was like an icy knife. The courtyard was covered with a layer of white. It was fine yesterday. Why is the snow getting heavier and heavier overnight? Jiang Pingji looked at the sky. Fine snow was falling. Feng Jin was obviously used to it. He ordered the servants to prepare a tea stove and sat opposite Jiang Pingji in the corridor of the courtyard to brew tea. He frowned and looked at the courtyard. It had only been one night, but the snow was already as thick as a knuckle. The weather was indeed unusual. However, since the founding of Dongqing, there had been natural and man-made disasters. It was either a drought or a flood. They were afraid that the nobles would get drunk and enjoy the snow in the garden. They would hold banquets, poetry meetings, and gatherings without a care for the lives of the people outside. Chapter 302. The snow will continue for another day or two. Feng Jin shook his head. It's always like this in Shangjing. It snows earlier and earlier every year. Jiang Pingji looked at the snow-covered roofs in the distance. She frowned as if she was worried about something. On the day of the Qianglin banquet, the snow did not stop. The entire Shangjing city was covered in a layer of white. However, the cold outside could not stop the liveliness of the Qianglin banquet. They toasted each other, sang and danced. The graceful dancers wore watercolored gauze and danced gracefully in the snow. They were like fairies from the ninth heaven who could ascend to immortality at any time. Jiang Pingji saw their bare feet. Their feet were red and blue from the ice. She suddenly lost the mood. She felt uncomfortable watching it, but the other scholars were watching with great interest. This Master Yuanjing is so powerful. His students have taken 2 of the top 3 places. I heard that if Master Yuanjing's disciple Lu Zheng was not born in a poor family, he would be in the top 3. If that's the case, it's scary. I heard that Master Yuanjing has another disciple. Where is he? Are you talking about Wei Zixiao? I heard that someone spoke rudely to him during the assessment. His temper flared up and he left after hitting the person. That's a pity? What's there to pity? He hit someone. He's so rude. He doesn't look like a scholar. He's just a boorish man. Jiang Pingji sat in her seat. She was surrounded by scholars of similar status. All of them were gossiping. Some relied on their family's wealth to buy a position, while others relied on their parents to join in the fun. Jiang Pingji belonged to the latter group. She drank some sake in silence and left the Qianglin banquet with the excuse that she could not hold her liquor. Suke drove the carriage and stopped outside. He saw Jiang Pingji walking over, wrapped in a thick white cloak. From afar she looked like a moving white ball. He suppressed his laughter and hurriedly got off the carriage to put down the stool. He was not a coachman. He just wanted to see where the Qianglin banquet was held. The commoners had the chance to enter. Suke would never be able to enter if he did not have other opportunities. Jiang Pingji knew what Suke was thinking, so she did not stop him. The weather gets cold really fast. You should wear more clothes when you go out. I told you to wait in the carriage, yet you insist on sitting outside. Isn't this suffering? Here, this is for you to warm your hands, lest you say that I mistreat you behind my back. Suku took the delicate hand warmer. It was small and exquisite and was wrapped in a thick layer of cloth. It did not burn his hand and felt like it was meant for a little girl. Langjun, you have wronged me. When did I complain about you behind your back? Even if there is, it would be a direct complaint. Suku did not want to provoke Jiang Pingji's eyes. No matter what he had in mind, he couldn't hide it. Rather than hiding it and being laughed at, he might as well come out openly. What a glib tongue. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. Just as she was about to step onto the carriage, she caught a glimpse of Wei Si, who was dressed in a green Confucian robe, standing in the wind and snow with an umbrella in his hand. She stopped in her tracks and turned to Suku. Take the hand warmer and hide in the carriage. I have something to do. After Suku heard this, he was surprised. He could not help but shift his gaze towards Wei Si. As someone who was obsessed with invisible voices, it was hard for him not to remember anyone with a special voice. Not to mention, other than his moving voice, Wei Si could also be considered a person with a clear demeanor and handsome bones. Jiang Pingji walked forward and teased, Zixiao, are you waiting for me here? Wei Si did not overreact like before. Instead, he said calmly, I'm just waiting here like your accountant. As for who I'm waiting for, it depends on who I'm waiting for. If you think I'm waiting for you, it's okay to think so. Was he mocking her for being narcissistic? Jiang Pingji's expression darkened. She looked at Wei Si with an inquisitive gaze. Wei Si did not avoid her gaze. He looked down and slightly lowered his head to look into her eyes. His eyes were open, not empty like before. As he spoke, he tilted the umbrella in his hand slightly and covered the top of Jiang Pingji's head. The wind and snow are strong. You should go back quickly. Did you write the article yourself? Jiang Pingji asked Wei Si with a serious face. She was not being polite. Wei Si smiled calmly and asked her in reply, Do you think your father leaked the article so that I can find someone to write it for me? Jiang Pingji was silent. It was not because she suspected that Wei Si would find someone to write for him, but she felt that Wei Si's thinking was too different from the literati of the time. If everyone in the world went to study, who would do the farming? If there were more people studying, there would be more people sharing the cake. How would the aristocrats, who monopolized the inheritance of knowledge, be willing to do that? Wei Si was also born in an aristocratic family. Even if the Wei family of Langya had withered, their ancestors were once prominent. The aristocrats had a sense of pride in their bones. They boasted that their bloodline was superior to others and that they were born to be superior to others. Either Wei Si really had such a broad vision, or he was just a naive youth who didn't know much about the world. No matter how Jiang Pingji looked at him, Wei Si did not seem to be the latter. You have a glib tongue, she said with a fake smile. It seems that you already know how to maintain your composure in front of me. Wei Si's voice sounded a little relieved. Once bitten, twice shy. Although I dare not be on par with Yumo and the others, I am not a fool without talent. Naturally, I will not fall in the same place twice. If you still want to test me, I am afraid you will be disappointed. Jiang Pingji turned her head to look at him and said with a drawn-out, Oh. You should be glad that there are many people and carriages here. Wei Si raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? Zixiao is talented and his clothes match the vast snowy scenery. If there is no one around, Jiang Pingji did not finish her sentence. Instead, she raised her eyebrows at him and gave him a very ambiguous and flirtatious hint. Wei Si suddenly tightened his grip on the umbrella handle and straightened his expression. Go eat the snow. Jiang Pingji laughed so hard that even her shoulders were shaking. Wei Si's reaction was really interesting. He was like an arrogant cat. Unintentionally, Jiang Pingji looked at the vast snowy landscape and suddenly said this. After the Qianglin banquet, my father is going to resign. Wei Si's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. Your father has just become an official. Why is he going to resign? Take a guess? Wei Si looked at the short man who was not even as tall as his chest and said in a low voice, If you don't intervene, your father may be able to retire and have some peace. Now that the situation in Dongqing is getting more and more serious, the day Nanxing is destroyed will be the day the world will be in chaos. Retiring is a good way to avoid the chaos. But if Langjun intervenes, I'm afraid that this memorial will be a move to advance by retreating. Retreat to advance? That's a good word. Then take a guess, which step am I advancing to? Wei Si closed his eyes. If everything had not changed, the person in front of him would not be so ambitious. At most, she would lead a bunch of bandits to stir up trouble in Dongqing. But now, Wei Ci could feel that she wanted to be the emperor many years earlier than she was in the past. If that was the case. He closed his eyes and thought for a while, then he said two words with certainty. Chongzhou. Fortune was found in danger. Whether it was her in the past or now, Wei Ci did not expect her to be steady and sure. You really know me well. Chapter 303. He calmed himself down and asked calmly, from what I can see, don't you know me very well? Jiang Pingji smiled and did not continue to interrogate Wei Ci. Boiling a frog in warm water had to be done slowly. What if a pot of boiling water was poured down and scared people away? She looked like she was looking at the sky, but she was actually paying attention to the paper umbrella in Wei Ci's hand. Even though he threw a tantrum and moved the umbrella away, he quietly moved it back and let the snow pile up on his shoulders. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and took off the cloak, indicating for Wei Ci to put it on. I'll have to trouble you to take care of me when I study in Langyi. Wei Ci glanced at the thick white fur cloak and said calmly, you and I can be considered to be acquaintances. Master also admires your talent. I think you won't face any difficulties in the academy. Why do you need to bribe me? I'm not afraid of the cold or heat, so it doesn't matter how much I wear. But Zixiao is weak and we're still standing in the snow waiting for someone. It's better to be careful. Jiang Pingji threw the cloak into his arms. He could wear it if he wanted. After that, Jiang Pingji turned and walked to her carriage. She stepped on the bench and said, to the Feng residence. Just as she raised her hand to lift the curtain, Su Ku, who had been watching them, handed the hand stove back to her. The driver of the carriage, who was wearing a bamboo hat, pulled the reins and drove away. He happened to pass by Wei Ci. You gave the cloak to Wei Langjun. Taksha will talk about you when you go back. Su Ku knelt near the door of the carriage and put his hands into warm gloves. The thick layer of rabbit fur was very comfortable. Jiang Pingji held the hand stove and added charcoal in it. The temperature was higher than before. Your Langjun is strong and healthy. He can kill 2 cows with his bare hands. Will he get sick without a cloak? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. He's just a weak scholar. He doesn't wear much, but he's standing outside like a log. Isn't he afraid of catching a cold? Su Ku was suddenly speechless. Indeed, his Langjun looked young and weak, but in fact his fighting ability was off the charts. His appearance was too deceiving. I heard from Huayu that Zixiao's family has moved to Zhongzhou and returned to the clan. He stayed in Langyi alone. Who knows how many maids and old women took care of him. The weather changes so fast. I guess he didn't prepare many clothes to keep warm. Jiang Pingji was a meticulous person, but she rarely took the initiative to care about others. In other words, in her opinion, there was no need to care at all. Everyone had 2 hands and 2 feet. If they couldn't even take care of themselves, wouldn't they be? That wouldn't work in the ancient times. After Su Ku heard this, he couldn't help but sigh. His Langjun seemed to have become more humane. The Jasper Forest banquet seemed to be a celebratory banquet held for a few scholars who had stood out from the crowd, but in reality, it was merely a place for people to sing praises and flatter. Many of the courtiers exerted all their skills, fawning and servile appearances, which made people secretly feel angry. The Qianglin banquet seemed to be a celebration for a few outstanding scholars, but in fact, it was just a place for people to sing praises and flatter. Many officials tried their best to flatter, which made people angry. Han Yu was a hot-tempered person. He didn't have the slightest intention of restraining himself in front of his close friends. Looking at it now, it seems that it was the right decision to beat them up and leave that day as a filial piety. You are so servile and have no backbone at all. It's just, Qing Jing stared at Han Yu and stopped him from continuing. Be careful with your words. Have you forgotten? Be careful with your words and actions. Have you forgotten these 4 words? Qing Jing said in a low voice. If you get yourself killed because of this. Compared to Han Yu and Qing Jing's nervousness, Lu Jing secretly stuck out his belly and resisted the urge to eat. There was a lot of delicious food at the Qianglin banquet. Lu Jing was born in a poor family. He was the son of a hunter and liked to roll in the mud since he was a child. If Master Yuanjing hadn't said that he was destined to meet him and brought him back to the academy to teach him, he wouldn't be qualified to stand at the Qianglin banquet. It was a rare opportunity. It would be a waste if he didn't eat. He was not Han Yu or Qing Jing. He didn't eat much, but he was angry. The walls have ears. You should pay attention. Wenbin, this is not a good place to complain. Lu Jing paced slowly with his belly full. He looked very relaxed, but he was so full that he couldn't walk. Han Yu took a deep breath and tried his best to suppress his anger. From afar, the few of them saw Wuxia hugging a white velvet cloak in his arms. He stood rooted to the ground in a daze, not knowing what he was thinking. Lu Zheng was thick-skinned enough. He stepped forward with a smile and pretended to reach out to take the cloak from Wuxia's arms. He even said, "Zixiao is indeed the most considerate. He knows that I'm not wearing much today, so he specially brought the cloak here. I thank him in advance." Before his hand touched the cloak, Wuxia took a step back and said bluntly, "It's not for you." Lu Zheng wasn't angry. Instead, he sneakily looked at the tie on the collar of the cloak. The end of the tie was decorated with 2 delicate fur balls, which didn't match Wuxia's style. Not only that, but the size of the cloak was also inappropriate. "Then who is it for?" Lu Zheng asked. Wuxia ignored him. He glanced at Han Yu and Cheng Jing's expression and sighed. "You don't look happy. Were you bullied at the banquet?" Han Yu didn't pay attention to the cloak. His attention was drawn back to the Qianglin banquet. The anger that he had suppressed just now came out again. The so-called important officials in the court are all servile and flattering. They don't have any dignity. The court will be finished sooner or later if this continues. Wuxia glanced around and felt relieved when he didn't see anyone. They're just servile to the bone. Why are you angry with them? Wuxia smiled carelessly. I heard that before the Qianglin banquet, the head of the secretariat, Feng Ren, resigned and returned to his hometown. Not only did the government not ask him to stay, but they promoted a confidant. Isn't that clear enough for you to see? You want a docile and obedient domestic cat, not a wild cat that is hard to tame and arrogant. Han Yu almost exploded. Who are you calling a wild cat? Wuxia continued, it's just the Qianglin banquet. You can't control your temper. What will you do in the future? What do you mean? Han Yu asked. Nowadays the eunuchs secretly sell their titles. The price of each official position is clearly marked and they give it to anyone who has money. Do you think that it's only the eunuchs who are greedy? The greedy ones are the big ones. Wuxia and the others got into the carriage. The charcoal in the carriage dispelled the cold air. He pointed to the sky. Wenbin is ranked 3rd in the assessment. When the time comes he will only get a small official position. It's not even as high as the official positions that those scoundrels buy with money. You will be so angry that 1 Buddha is born and 2 Buddhas will go to heaven. Han Yu almost choked on his words. Wei Zixiao, you are too mean. Wuxia was not afraid and continued, I have something more mean. Do you want to hear it? Lu Zheng secretly held back his laughter. Cheng Jing shook his head helplessly and fiddled with the silver wire charcoal in the charcoal basin. Chapter 304. Han Yu was a stubborn person. He would jump up and down when Wuxia provoked him a little. However, Wuxia didn't continue to bully Han Yu this time. Instead he sighed. The official's family indulges the eunuchs. They even pretend that they don't see it when they sell titles and positions. As for the relatives of the emperor, when one of them achieves the Tao, all of them follow suit. It's obvious that the official wants to support 2 parties and make things difficult for the aristocratic families. There are 2 reasons for Feng Ren's resignation. Firstly, he wanted to defend his second son, Feng Jin, against injustice. Secondly, he could tell that Dongqing was seriously ill and could not be saved. Cheng Jing continued, Wenbin's temperament can still be tempered. He is so angry now. What can he do in the future? Feng Ren's resignation had already become a signal. If the other aristocratic families had foresight, they would have left one after another or stood by indifferently. The vacated positions naturally became the cake that the eunuchs and the relatives of the emperor fought for. No matter which side won, the people they placed in the positions were mostly people with bad intentions who only cared about their own interests. If the imperial court could still be saved, it would be a blessing in disguise. The corner of Han Yu's mouth twitched. The 2 people in front of him echoed each other, which made him look immature. Shaoyin, don't you have anything to say? Han Yu asked Lu Zheng for help. Lu Zheng snorted, I have no ambition in my life. I just have enough to eat, wear warm clothes and have a house to live in. As long as I am an official, I am still an official. I just need to live my own life and take care of the people under my rule. As for the rest, I don't have the ability. Let the capable ones take care of it. Han Yu was so angry that he almost fell down. What kind of help is this? It's a stupid teammate. Cheng Jing said, Wenbin, don't be stubborn. Do what you should do. It's not a good time to be an official in the current situation. Han Yu felt wronged. Are the 3 of you here to comfort me or to piss me off? Wuxia winked mischievously and said to him, I didn't say that I'm here to comfort you. Han Yu was speechless. That was the end of their friendship. According to the previous practice, the scholars who stood out in the assessment would receive the appointment letter from the imperial court within half a month and be dispatched to various places. Regarding the arrangement of scholars, they would generally consider their abilities and family backgrounds. Although their official positions were not high, they were very challenging, and it was easy for them to accumulate experience. In more remote places, the official rank was slightly higher, while in more prosperous places, it was slightly lower. If there were family members making arrangements everywhere, their official positions and locations could also be changed at their discretion. It was very practical. However, now that the court was in chaos, many officials had tacitly forgotten about this matter, and the emperor did not even mention it. Yuan Jing and his entourage stayed in Shangjing for half a month. Many students were worried that something might happen. Wuxia and the rest were able to settle down. Every day they would either quietly study and practice calligraphy, or play a few rounds with their classmates and recite poems to pass the time. Lu Zheng was sitting at the side of the chessboard watching Wuxia beat Hanyu up. He was suddenly enlightened and suddenly said, "It's already been half a month. If I don't go back soon, I'm afraid I'll have to spend the new year in Shangjing." Hanyu looked at the situation on the chessboard and felt his head hurt. It's not good to leave before the appointment letter from the imperial court. Wuxia placed his chess piece with a smile, forcing Hanyu into a dead end. "Perhaps this letter of appointment won't be sent down." "Why do you say so?" Hanyu asked. Wuxia said sarcastically, "Perhaps all the vacant official positions have been sold out." Of course, it was impossible for all the official positions to be sold out. However, the imperial court was busy preparing for the marriage between the princess of the northern borderline, and Yaina, and the second prince. Dongqing still wanted to wrangle with the northern borderline. All of them wanted to gain benefits for themselves. Why would they care about these scholars? These days, apart from Feng Ren's retirement, it was the retirement of the county chief of Hu County, Lu Shi. For the former, the emperor was happy to take back the position of the head of the secretariat and promote his confidant. For the latter, the emperor wanted to do the same. However, Lu Shi presented a memorial at the imperial court meeting. Immediately, someone jumped out and said how hard Lu Shi had worked all these years. Under his rule, Hu County had turned from a desolate and uninhabited county to a major grain-producing county. He had alleviated the food shortage of the two neighboring states. He was a meritorious minister. He was still so young. If he retired, it would be the biggest loss for Dongqing. The speech was so impassioned that the emperor was too embarrassed to accept Lu Shi's retirement. If that's the case, do any of you have any good suggestions? Although the emperor was shameless, he did not want to embarrass himself at the imperial court meeting. He still had to cover his embarrassment. Lu Shi took the opportunity to repeat his intention to retire. Another official jumped out and said no. If the emperor agreed, wouldn't the world mistakenly think that the emperor coveted the riches of Hu County and wanted to burn the bridge after crossing it to take the opportunity to seize the fruits of victory from others? Lu Shi was a brick. He would move wherever there was a shortage. After an intense discussion, someone suddenly mentioned that Chongzhou still lacked a prefecture magistrate. A prefecture magistrate was more important than a county chief. The former managed the land of a state, while the latter managed a small county. Everyone had completely forgotten that Chongzhou only had Shangyu County and Changhe County. Shangyu County had a total of 6 cities. 3 of them were still in the hands of the northern borderline. Its overall area was the smallest among the 6 states of Dongqing. Its north was also connected to the northern borderline. Who knew how long it would take to lose one's head? Although Hu County was only a county, its area was comparable to a state. Moreover, it was now incomparably rich under Lu Shi's governance. The Dongqing emperor weighed the pros and cons in his heart and decisively made a decision. He pretended to express how much he valued Lu Shi. He also said that the world was in turmoil. If Lu Shi were to retire now, it would be a loss for Dongqing and a regret for the people. Without a second word, he threw the position of Chongzhou magistrate onto Lu Shi's head. Lu Shi appeared tired and unresigned as he agreed, but in his heart, he sighed. He had a godlike teammate by his side. His opponents were all pigs. The difficulty was too low. There was no challenge at all. Lu Shi bore the steaming, freshly baked magistrate of Chongzhou and went to court with a cold expression. He ignored everyone. He doesn't know what's good for him. He was promoted from a county chief to a prefecture magistrate, and now he's putting on a straight face. Tisk, who doesn't know that Hu County is now in high demand? 1 county can feed 2 states. How much food is that? From what I see, Lu Shi has no intention of retiring. He's just putting on an act, hoping to stay in Hu County. Who knew that the emperor would transfer him to Chongzhou? Chongzhou, what kind of place is that? 3 wolves are watching from the north. He can't sleep well at night. Oh? Isn't that a big loss? Cleverness can be mistaken for cleverness. Who asked him to be so stupid? I wonder who will take over as the county chief of Hu County? In any case, it can't be the 2 of us. Let's just watch the show. Everyone wants a piece of Hu County. The small discussions around him drifted into Lu Shi's ears. His face was still livid. After he boarded the carriage, he suddenly smiled faintly. Cleverness can be mistaken for cleverness? Soon, everyone would know who the real stupid person was. The carriage stopped. Lu Shi got down from the sedan chair. His confidant came forward to speak to him. Master, the person Lang Jun is looking for has been found. Lu Shi was stunned. His expression quickly changed. Found? Yes, they look 70% similar. His confidant gestured a 7. Lu Shi's chest was beating rapidly, as if it was about to jump out of his throat. Chapter 305. Lu Shi's eyes darkened and he ordered, "Bring her to Lanting. She will handle it." Hearing that Lu Shi was going to hand the girl over to Lu Shi, the confidant's face suddenly became bitter. He stuttered and hesitated. Lu Shi saw the situation and said, "Just say what you want to say. You don't have to hide half of it." "I didn't mean to hide it. It's just that I heard from the master that you want to hand the girl over to Lang Jun. I don't think it's appropriate." The confidant hesitantly moved closer to Lu Shi and finally said what was on his mind. "That girl's identity is not clean. If Lang Jun's temperament changes, I won't be able to absolve myself of the blame." Lu Shi immediately understood the meaning of the confidant's words. His expression suddenly became very interesting. He hesitated for a while and said, "Follow me." The confidant followed Lu Shi's footsteps and carefully kept a step away from him. He lowered his head and hands, not daring to look around. "Tell me in detail. What's wrong with the girl's identity?" Although Lu Shi had guessed it, he still had to confirm it. The confidant knelt down. There was no one around, so there was no need to worry about eavesdropping. "The girl I found is 14 years old. Her mother is a lowly prostitute. Her father is unknown." The confidant was very helpless. They had secretly searched for the girl based on the portrait Lu Shi had given them. The girl was the most similar in appearance and temperament. Although the other candidates were clean, they were not as similar. After thinking about it, the confidant recommended the girl. Lowly prostitute? Lu Shi furrowed his brows. He was very unhappy with the identity. Has she received guests before? He wasn't sure what his daughter wanted to do, but he knew that the girl he found was probably a honey trap. The confidant's expression twisted and he said carefully, "Master, you also know that prostitutes usually live in shameful slums. Most of the customers who come and go are peddlers and hooligans. Women who grow up in such places are unlucky. At the age of 5 or 6, they are, not to mention that person is already 14. Lu Shi's face darkened when he heard the confidant. "Bring the girl to Lanting and let her make a decision. Continue to investigate secretly and see if there are more similar and suitable candidates." The confidant took the order and bowed and left. Lu Shi sat where he was, immersed in the shadows of the room. After a long time he seemed to have understood something. He held his forehead with one hand, and his expression seemed to be smiling yet not smiling, crying yet not crying. It faintly carried a trace of pleasure of being about to take revenge, which washed away his usual gentleness, and his whole body was surrounded by a cold and poisonous aura. So what if she's the daughter of a prostitute? He seemed to be listless as he murmured in a low voice. His voice was suppressing the viciousness that made one shudder. It made one's hair stand on end. "In the future, if I wear that face and use that body to turn Dongqing upside down, then that's what I call delightful." Kao was born in the slums of the poor. On the day of her birth, it was snowing heavily. Many of the adults froze to death, but she survived. Her mother was a prostitute, and now she was also a prostitute and a prostitute under her mother. What was a prostitute? The lowest of prostitutes could be casually used for 3 to 5 copper coins. Even though she was scared to death in order to survive, she had no choice but to feign civility and serve them well. Otherwise, not only would the customers not let her go, but the brothel keeper above her, her mother, would also not let her go. She was always dressed in ragged linen clothes that had been washed and patched. Every day she had to clean the house, wash the clothes, wash the dishes and cook. She had to serve the madam and the other prostitutes until they were comfortable. Then she would lie on the tattered mat and wait for one customer after another. When she was a child, she was carelessly taken advantage of by a few ruffians and lost her virginity. Her mother beat her like crazy, and then forced her to accept customers and inherit her mother's business. She lived in a muddle. Over the years she did not know how many children were beaten. She had only lived for 14 years, but she felt that she had lived more than half of her life. Even though she was born beautiful, she now had a lot of white hair. Her face was haggard and her eyes were sunken. She thought that this was the end of her life, but she did not expect to be taken away from the slums by a man dressed in a very powerful outfit 2 days ago. She knelt on the ground, trembling, and her skinny body trembled like a sieve. Her whole body wished she could lie on the ground, and she did not dare to look around. After waiting for a long time, the sound of a paper door opening came from behind her, and unfamiliar footsteps walked past her. After a rustling sound, the person sat directly on the seat of honor. "What's your name?" Judging from the voice, the person should not be old, maybe even younger than Akeo. She had heard many hoarse voices and all kinds of malicious yelling, but she had never heard such a clear and peaceful voice. Her body trembled uncontrollably, and Akeo felt that her mouth was not hers anymore. She even forgot the instinct to open her mouth to speak. Seeing her behavior, Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry to say anything. Instead, she asked Takshu to serve tea and drink it to calm her nerves. The audience in the streaming room had long been looking forward to it. They did not know what the streamer was up to. Who was so important that she would leave behind the remaining chessboard and the young man Feng Jin, and come over so quickly? Looking at it now, it did not seem to be much. Lao Ciji Lianming, I feel that the streamer would not do unnecessary things. She attaches so much importance to this person. Her identity must be very powerful. To Ciji Jiwu, #Laftihi. Maybe she is the streamer's younger sister who is stranded outside. Inueja Zhugachinma, there are no clues. I can't guess the streamer's intentions. I'd better get a small stool and watch slowly. After waiting for a while, Jiang Pingji felt that the other party's emotions had stabilized, so she asked again. "What's your name?" Akeo's ears were flushed, and she felt a sense of inferiority that she could not wait to crawl into the ground. "My name is Akeo." Although Akeo did not sound nice, it was a proper name. "Akeo?" Jiang Pingji heard it and asked again, "Do you know who asked you to come here?" Akeo's thin and weak body trembled and she said in a low voice like a cat, "I don't know. I vaguely remember that it was a master." For Akeo, people who were neat and tidy were considered wealthy. She had never seen the clothes worn by Lu Shi's confidant. Such a dignified person could be considered a master. Jiang Pingji asked again, "Then do you know why you are here?" Akeo bit her lower lip, and there was a little embarrassment on her thin and weak face. Only then did she slowly sit up straight with her head hanging down. She put her hands on her waist and pretended to pull off the belt around her waist. If it was on a normal day, Akeo would at most be wrapped in a tattered dress, and she would wear nothing underneath. Because she was poor, she could not afford to wear it. Besides, it was useless for a prostitute to wear clothes. In the end, she would have to strip naked to serve others. Lu Shi's confidant brought her back and asked the maid to prepare a complete set of clothes for her. She washed it from head to toe with soap several times. Chapter 306. Therefore she untied the belt around her waist and only unbuttoned the outer layer of clothes. She was still wrapped in 2 or 3 layers of clothes. Jiang Pingji saw that and stood in front of Akeo. Akeo clenched her fists nervously and embarrassedly. She thought that a strange body would press down on her, but she saw a pair of clean, white hands in her sight. They were really clean. Even the round fingernails had a transparent luster. The clothes that were taken off were neatly put back on by those hands. The belt was tied in a beautiful knot at the waist. "I didn't ask you to come here to do this." Naturally, the excited veterans in the streaming room who were waiting for the girl to take off her clothes and offer herself for sex could stop for a while. Akeo no longer lowered her head. She thought that she was hiding something and quietly raised her head. She wanted to see Jiang Pingji's face. She was stunned when she saw her face. She was younger than she had imagined. Such a young noble family's young master would also seek pleasure in the slums? She was confused. "Then, what should I do?" Akeo asked in a daze. "Enjoy life." Jiang Pingji looked at Akeo's face carefully. According to Lu Shi's confidant, this girl was 70% similar to that girl. If she was taken good care of, she would probably look even more similar when she grew up in the future. It was as if she had been reborn. As the saying went, beauty was in the bones, not in the skin. Even if the girl was very thin and her face was tired, she was still beautiful. Enjoy life. Yes, live like a concubine. A concubine? Akeo widened her eyes in shock. That was the emperor's daughter, the high and mighty princess, right? A very beautiful face. It will let you live the best life for the rest of your life. Jiang Pingji did not hide her praise. Even if Akeo had gray hair, a thin body and a haggard face, she still had a kind of beauty. Akeo also came to her senses at this moment. Her expression changed and she was a little thoughtful. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. How could such a good thing happen to her? If she had such a good life, how could she have been bullied by a few hooligans when she was 7 or 8 years old? She had to crawl home half dead. She had been so wronged and she was even beaten by her mother with a matchstick. Her mother scolded her for being indecent and saying that she was born to be a slut. He had suffered so much in the past, so why did good things befall him now? I will let you live more comfortably than Empress concubine. Jiang Pingji sat in front of Akeo. She did not deliberately explain anything. She just waited for her reaction. Then, what should this lowly servant do to live better than Empress concubine? Akeo secretly tightened her sleeves. She could not help but feel nervous and afraid when facing Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji smiled. The girl in front of her was of low birth, but she was very smart. She could be molded. Be loyal to me. Even if you have to cross a mountain of daggers or a sea of flames, you have to step over it for me. If you work for me, I'll let you live a better life. Equivalent exchange. There was nothing in this world that could be enjoyed without sewing. I know what your life was like in the past. It's not an exaggeration to say that it was hell on earth. Are you really willing to be treated as a commodity for the rest of your life and be bullied for a few copper coins? Akeo's heart skipped a beat. Countless disgusting faces flashed in front of her eyes, from the hooligans of 12 or 13 to the shameless old men of 50 or 60. She could not help but ask herself, this person said that she had value. Should she not seize it and continue to live a life that everyone despised? She no longer wanted to live the life of receiving and sending people off. If she continued, sooner or later she would die under a man's body. She was only 14 years old this year, but she had already seen the outcome of aging. Her mother valued those fresh and young prostitutes more. There was a fixed number of customers every day. She was the only one who had to take off her clothes to serve when someone paid. What? People in this line of work eat to show their age. You're already 14 years old. After working for so many years, even the most delicate flowers will be destroyed. Akeo could not help but think of the 11-year-old girl that her mother had newly bought. Her voice echoed in her ears and she could not help but shiver. Clenching her teeth, Akeo could not help but grab Jiang Pingji's sleeves with both hands. She begged and sobbed, I'm not resigned to this. Don't send me back. Then work for me. Jiang Pingji's voice did not fluctuate at all, as if she was just informing her of one thing. Okay. The audience in the streaming room expressed that their worldview was once again shattered by the streamer. Was she streaming how to abduct and sell people? Quachuangkai, I'm stunned. Even human traffickers are not as domineering as the streamer. Lao Ciji Lianming, I seem to understand a little. The streamer wants to play a honey trap? Nugatang, honey trap? People come willingly for the honey trap. The streamer is coaxing and coercing, isn't she? Yinuagia Zhuga Chinma, I can tell that you didn't watch the streaming carefully. The streamer's words just now obviously revealed a message. This little girl may have lived an inhumane life in the past. Didn't you see the bruises on her neck? The streamer wants to use her to play a honey trap and sell her body. The little girl can also take the opportunity to escape from hell and live a good life. It's an equivalent exchange. Even so, some audience in the streaming room still could not accept it. Jiang Pingji, the streamer, was challenging their worldview. However, it seemed that some audience in the streaming room had a more twisted worldview than Jiang Pingji. Lao Ciji Lianming, streamer, you can't be so straightforward. Who knows if a person who can be moved by benefits will be attracted by better benefits? You should move her with emotions and reason. Little girls are more emotional and easy to deceive. I believe you can do it. Yinuagia Zhuga Chinma, well, although the person above is a little cold-blooded, you do need to be more cautious. There's nothing wrong with that. The audience in the streaming room, according to Jiang Pingji's personality, how could she not consider these things? She could see clearly what kind of person Akeo was. Lu Shi's illegitimate daughter married Wuma Jun. There were at least 2 years of buffer time. Within these 2 years, it all depended on whether Akeo could pass the test and become a valuable chess piece. Moreover, Jiang Pingji did not need Akeo to do anything dangerous. She only needed to make herself fair and plump, dress up beautifully every day, avoid conspiracies and tricks, and live a lazy and comfortable life. With this face alone, she was destined to be praised to the skies. The name Akeo is not good. Change it. Jiang Pingji tilted her head and thought about it. She said meaningfully, Huijun, this is the name. Akeo did not know what the word Huijun was, but it sounded very proper and pleasant. It did not sound like a poor girl could use it at all. She bowed and bowed. Thank you, Master Langjun. You work for me. Naturally, I can't treat you unfairly. Jiang Pingji asked her, what do you want to do the most now? Akeo. The current Huijun thought about it seriously and asked her timidly, what do you want to do the most, no matter what? I will definitely do it for you as long as it is within my capabilities. Huijun bit her lip. Her face was pale, but she said firmly, I want to kill a few people. They are all bad people who deserve to die. If it were not for those ruffians, she might not have become a prostitute. Even though she knew that it was unrealistic, because her mother had taken a fancy to her face long ago and felt that she was a rare commodity, but she had lost her chastity. In her mother's eyes, she was worthless. Chapter 307. Jiang Pingji placed her fingers together in a comfortable and happy posture. Remember to hide Huijuan's identity so that no one finds out. Lu Shi's confidant was stunned when he heard the name Huijun. He couldn't remember who she was for a moment. Jiang Pingji saw his confusion and explained, Huijun is the girl just now. Find someone to change her identity. The confidant accepted the order and said firmly, don't worry, Langjun. I will clean up her identity. Be careful. Don't give yourself away. After saying this, Jiang Pingji reminded him worriedly. Fabricating a household registration out of thin air is the easiest way to expose flaws. It's better to find someone who hasn't been cancelled and let Huijun replace it. Jiang Pingji tapped her fingers on the table. The household registration system in this era was very backward. Unlike her era, there was almost no possibility of fraud. In ancient times, because of backward technology and inconvenient transportation, many people didn't have household registration. Many people on the household registration died or disappeared, and they didn't cancel it for more than a decade. This kind of identity was very difficult to verify, and it was easy to take advantage of loopholes. Instead of taking the risk of creating a new identity for Huijun, it was better to let her replace the identity of someone who had similar experiences as her. Lu Shi's confidant nodded and accepted the order. Jiang Pingji said, I have nothing else to do here. You can leave. Since he was a confidant that Lu Shi valued, his ability to handle matters naturally could not be underestimated. Soon the matter was settled. Akeo's mother, your Akeo is back. Quickly go back and see. The woman who was called Akeo's mother wore heavy makeup. Her clothes were frivolous, revealing a large area of her fair chest. She waved a yellowish fan in her hand. Her face was smeared with low-quality rouge, and her lips were painted with thick lipstick. Her slender waist and plump buttocks swayed gently. The curve made many ruffians who passed by jealous. They only felt that their throats were a little hot. What are you shouting about? She's back. That wicked girl left with the nobles for 2 or 3 days. She's forgotten about me. What a traitor. The woman's actual age was only in her early 30s, but she looked like a woman in her 40s. Despite the heavy makeup, some signs could still be seen in her eyes. She must have been a beauty when she was young. However, because one's appearance came from one's heart, her eyes and brows always carried a bit of maliciousness and harshness, which made people's hearts beat fast and not dare to get close to her. No, Akeo's mother. Akeo, she, the one who came to report the news, was also a poor woman who lived in the slums. Although she looked down on Akeo's mother for selling herself, selling her daughter, and harming other women, she still felt a little pity for Akeo, who was a girl who grew up under her watch. She's just a little girl. It's fine if she comes back, but she wants me, her mother, to kneel and welcome her? The woman had a bad premonition, but she was more annoyed with her neighbor. Your Akeo is gone. What? Her money tree was dead? The woman was so shocked that her expression changed. She hurriedly followed her neighbor back home. There were already many people watching the show in front of the broken door. The woman rudely pushed the onlookers away and walked into the dark room. There was a girl in disheveled clothes in the room. She was her prostitute. She had just received a guest not long ago, and her face was still numb. She held the few pieces of rags that could not be wrapped around her body and shivered. There was a roll of mat in the middle of the room, and the mat was wrapped into a spring roll. The woman went forward to take a closer look and almost fainted. She lifted the mat with trembling hands and saw a female corpse with a festered face and a rough outline lying on the ground. Not to mention the face, the body was covered with marks of whipping and sex. The woman did not believe that it was a KO. She quickly tore the clothes on the female corpse and turned it over. There was a little red on the buttocks. This was a KO's birthmark. At this time she had to accept the fact that a KO was taken out by her benefactor and was humiliated and tortured to death. Most of the onlookers were residents near the slums. They knew how this woman usually treated a KO. Even an enemy would not humiliate others like this. Now that a KO was dead, it was exactly what this woman wanted. But the poor girl died too miserably. To their surprise, the woman who should have spat on the corpse did not humiliate the corpse. Instead, she collapsed on the corpse and burst into tears. The blue veins on her forehead bulged, and her tears and snot smeared the heavy makeup on her face, which made the onlookers feel very strange. Akayo's mother has already? Alas, I'm sorry for your loss. Tidy up this child so that she can die with dignity. The woman who informed the woman could not bear it and came up to persuade her gently. Yes, buy a better coffin for Akayo. Those beasts sent her back and gave us 10 taels of silver. According to the price of 1 or 2 copper coins for a prostitute, she did not know how many times she had to sell the coffin for 10 taels of silver. In the eyes of the onlookers, the price of this compensation was worth it. The woman cried so hard that she almost could not breathe. She only survived after her neighbor pinched her philtrum. The body. Like duckweed. The woman only felt that the scenery before her eyes was spinning as if the world had turned upside down. She mumbled in a low voice, "Slut? Wait, yeah. Made me so miserable." After that, her head tilted and she actually breathed her last. With such a big thing happening in the slums, there were naturally many onlookers watching the show. No one knew that 4 dirty local ruffians had quietly disappeared. There were 4 more corpses in the mass grave outside the city. Each of them was stabbed with a dagger and died of blood loss. It's almost time. It's time to go, Huinyangzi. Akayo, who should have died, stood near the mass grave and looked at the 4 corpses that could not be identified with their original appearance. Her gaze was complicated. Her blood-stained hands were still trembling, and her 2 calves were trembling non-stop, but there was an unprecedented carefree feeling in her heart. "Well, I'm coming." She put on the wide hood of the cloak, covering most of her face, only revealing her slender chin. She clenched both sides of the cloak tightly with both hands to block the cold wind outside. She stepped on the sedan chair and entered the inconspicuous carriage. The carriage quietly left the mass grave. As Akayo's passed, she was also buried here. Only Huijun was alive. "Are you sure? You heard Akayo's mother mention the name Huiyun?" When Lu Shi heard the reply of his confidant, his expression was a little strange. The confidant was originally worried that there would be changes, so he pretended to be a poor person and mixed in with the onlookers, but he did not expect to have an unexpected gain. "Yes, I'm sure. Huijun." Huiyun, Lu Shi silently said it twice. The pronunciation was the same, but the words were different. The former was the new name that Lanting gave to Akayo. It was impossible for Akayo's mother to know. In that case, the name that she muttered before she died could only be that woman. Chapter 308. This year's first snowfall lasted for more than half a month. The weather became colder day by day. Many houses were crushed by the snow, and the number of casualties was unknown. A few aristocratic families in Shangjing opened granaries and set up porridge stalls everywhere. Even more wealthy families continued to lead a befuddled life. Jiang Pingji was temporarily staying in the Feng residence. When she heard that there was a porridge stall, she followed Feng Jin out to distribute porridge to the people. The snow continued to fall outside. Several rows of commoners had already lined up in front of the porridge stall. Almost all of them looked haggard and wore thin clothes. Some of the commoners wore rather thick clothes, but they were covered with patches of various sizes. "I wonder how many people have been crushed to death by this heavy snow, and how many people have been frozen to death." The manservant at the porridge stall looked at the endless queue and whispered to the manservant beside him. His words were filled with pity and sympathy. Even though 2 large pots had been set up, the porridge was still not enough for the common people. His companion was so busy that his feet didn't even touch the ground. "Stop talking nonsense. Work is more important. How can the life of a noble be the same as that of a lowly commoner?" Jiang Pingji helped to scoop up the porridge or carry firewood to start the fire. Feng Jin, a weak scholar, was so tired that his forehead was sweating. There was no noise or cue cutting, and the lively audience in the live broadcast room was silent for a long time. The atmosphere was extremely depressing, and some of the audience could not help but feel a lump in their throats. They did not have the courage to continue watching, and no one sent those immoral bullet screens to CG dance. Although we always complain about how cold it is in winter, so cold that we shiver, and complain that there is no natural heating in the south and it is very cold in winter. But we are living a happy life now, really, to CG dance. There is no natural heating in this area, but we can buy a heater from Taobao. It can be used to adjust the heat. If you are not afraid of wasting electricity, you can stay indoors in winter and still wear summer clothes. These were almost impossible in ancient times. The rich could wear more clothes and burn high-quality charcoal for warmth, but what about the common people? That's right, where are the commoners? Too many people could not afford to buy clothes to keep out the cold, could not afford to live in a house to block the wind, and could not afford to light a charcoal fire to heat the house. And this was in Shangjing, which was under the feet of the emperor. If this was the case here, what would happen to the surrounding areas of Shangjing? How many houses had collapsed, how many people had been crushed to death, and how many innocent lives had been frozen to death? Without any external conditions, he could only rely on his body to withstand the cold. If he could not withstand it, he would freeze to death. System, can I use popularity points to exchange for food? Warm clothes are fine too. Jiang Pingji secretly asked the system. No, the host's level is too low unless you choose to level up. The system's cold, mechanical voice fell into Jiang Pingji's ears, and she felt an unprecedented desire to kill. Jiang Pingji secretly calculated the total number of points in her back-end account and asked, I can exchange for food just by leveling up? What's the ratio? The system replied, 10,000 points can be exchanged for 50 kilograms of food. 10,000 points could be exchanged for 50 kilograms of grain? Jiang Pingji now had more than 3 million points. On the surface, it seemed that she could exchange them for a lot of food. However, Jiang Pingji was not someone who was easily fooled. The system didn't answer the first question. Even if it upgraded to level 3, it still didn't have the right to exchange for it. Let's not talk about this. To advance from a level 2 host to a level 3 host, he would need to spend 1 million popularity points. If all of them were exchanged, the remaining popularity points would not be able to be exchanged for much food according to the ratio given by the system. This was a trap. Forget it. I can't rely on you at all, Jiang Pingji replied coldly and turned her head to think of other ways. The system held its breath, but it did not dare to argue with Jiang Pingji. Unless Jiang Pingji chose to use her popularity points to level up, the system could not do anything to the host. The Feng family was one of the few aristocratic families in Shangjing that chose to open a porridge stall. They cooked porridge from day to night, but it was still in short supply. A bowl of porridge was not sticky, but it could at least fill one's stomach and warm up one's cold body. Jiang Pingji helped at the porridge stall for a few days, but she still did not hear any orders for disaster relief, let alone rice and winter clothing for disaster relief. Lu Shi returned from the morning assembly, and he looked more and more tired. He said with a gloomy face, I've written to the emperor many times, but the emperor always used the second prince's wedding as an excuse to evade it several times. Today he finally relented, but he gave this task to an official with the surname Shi. That person is greedy by nature, and he plucks feathers from every goose that passes by. I don't know how many people will embezzle the 20,000 taels of silver that were allocated, and how much will end up in the hands of the people. Although the world was not really chaotic, how much better was it than chaotic times? Jiang Pingji had been helping at the porridge stall for the past few days, or distributing winter clothing to the people, so she was the most familiar with the situation of the snow disaster. She snorted coldly. 20,000 taels of silver is not enough, let alone after being exploited and embezzled. What can it do? Lu Shi sighed. I've already secretly purchased a batch of food and sent it north to Shangjing, hoping to slightly alleviate the urgent situation. In the current world, whatever he did would be a drop in the bucket. It was better to solve the hidden problems from the root. After another 3 days, the snow finally stopped. Jiang Pingji looked at the invitation, and her smile was very cold. The second prince is getting married, and I am not related to him. Why would I go there? The vast city of Shangjing was covered in white snow, and the sky and earth were the same color. The princess of the royal family of the northern borderline wore a bright red wedding dress, and with the exception of the Dongqing emperor, she sat in a sedan carried by 16 people. The sedan was decorated with gold, silver, and jade, and hung with red satin, which shone under the sunlight. It was very luxurious. The wedding procession wore festive new clothes, and they entered Shangjing through the gate of the city. They walked around the city, and the people on both sides of the street cheered and gave their blessings. Hundreds of tables were set up next to the prince's palace, and the court officials and noble ladies went in and out. It was very lively. In sharp contrast, in a remote corner of Shangjing, there were stiff corpses that were dug out from the ruins. One by one, the frozen corpses were piled up in cart after cart. Jiang Pingji wore a plain dress, and her long hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin. Her expression was as cold as ice. The way of the world. It was really time for a change. Jiang Pingji ordered the manservant who was cleaning up the corpses, "Bury them well. The weather is cold now and the corpses will not rot easily, but we can't neglect them because of this. If the corpses are piled up and not dealt with, it will easily become an epidemic when spring comes." "Don't worry, Langjun. I will do it properly." At the same time, in another place in Shangjing, Lu Zheng was holding a plate and chewing the slightly cold white cake. He sighed and said, "It has been almost a month since the evaluation, and the imperial court still hasn't issued a letter of appointment. I think there is no hope this year. Master has decided to leave for Langyi in 2 days. I really don't want to come back to Shangjing again." Han Yu heard the sound of the wind blowing outside and he was very annoyed. Many people had frozen or starved to death, and the government still held such a grand wedding for the second prince, which was even bigger than the crown prince's wedding. Chapter 309. Han Yu wasn't in the mood to study because of the noise outside. Lu Zheng, on the other hand, was eating happily. Seeing that Han Yu was still frowning, Lu Zheng's eyes flickered and he asked casually, interrupting Han Yu's thoughts, "Where did Zixiao go? I didn't see him this morning and he wasn't reading in the morning either." Han Yu came back to his senses and asked, "You didn't see him either?" Lu Zheng ate a plate of white cakes and drank a big bowl of hot tea. The coldness in his body evaporated. "I didn't see him. This plate of white cakes was his breakfast. He didn't want to eat it because it was cold, so I cooked it and ate it." Lu Zheng patted his chest to calm himself down, then gulped down a big bowl of hot tea. The warm feeling made him feel a little sleepy. Han Yu's mouth twitched as if he could already imagine Wei Si's embarrassment when he came back and found that his food was gone. Where was Wei Si whom they were talking about at the moment? He was wearing a plain scholarly robe and a cloak that barely protected him from the cold. He went to the snow-stricken slums with 2 servants and a cart. Many slums that had been in disrepair for a long time had collapsed, making the already difficult roads extremely rugged. It was not easy for the people to get in and out of the slums. There was no porridge stall nearby, so many families had a hard time making a living. The thin elderly and children could only starve or freeze to death in the freezing weather. "Wei Langjun is here." As soon as he arrived at the entrance of the alley, a 7 or 8-year-old girl ran into the alley joyfully. Not long after, more than 20 thin old women or children less than 10 years old came out with bowls in their hands. Wei Si asked the servants to stop the cart and lifted the thick quilt covering the cart. There were 4 big buckets on the cart. Even though they were covered with lids, there was still sweet and fragrant hot air coming out. "Don't worry, everyone has a share." Although Wei Si didn't show much of an expression, beautiful people always had some privileges. The people were quite touched that he came to deliver food every day. They had long let down their guard and were not afraid of this fairy like Langjun. Instead, they liked him very much. Not long after, the 3 large buckets of steamed buns were all distributed, and the large bucket of thick porridge was also emptied. The leftovers were also scraped clean. At this moment, Wei Si realized that the hem of his clothes was being tugged by someone. He looked down and saw that the little girl with an ashen face was staring at him with her clear eyes. Her eyes were filled with admiration. Through those eyes, he seemed to see another child and his heart softened. Squatting down, he looked her in the eye and asked, "Have you completed the task I gave you 2 days ago?" The girl nodded heavily and her yellowish face blushed. She answered happily, "Yes, everything is done." The houses collapsed, crushing countless people who were sleeping to death. The roads were blocked, cutting off the connection between the people in the slums and the outside world. Wei Si hired the young and strong men from the slum to provide them with 3 meals a day. He also gave them extra wages to clear the rocks and snow on the road. If not for that, the big cart behind them would not have been able to be pushed in. Under the pressure of the snow, more houses would have suffered. The girl in front of him lost her mother in the snow disaster, and her father's leg was broken by a fallen beam. He could not work at all. Losing their only labor force, one could imagine the life of this family of two. Wuxia smiled and gave her a task. He asked her to remember the people who cleared the snow and rocks. He paid her daily wages and gave her warm clothes. The child was very concerned about this and did it very seriously. Very well done, he praised. The child smiled and opened her mouth, revealing her gums that were missing a few teeth. She seemed to realize that this was not good, so she shyly closed her mouth. Wuxia asked the servants to settle the wages for the day, and asked them to move a few bags of food from the cart, leaving some food for each family. I won't be coming in 2 days. There is still some food and money here. Keep it for everyone. Wuxia's family was considered to be in decline, but a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Before the Wei family moved, they left him a lot of money, enough for him to live a life without worries. It was just that he followed Master Yuanjing to the capital for the assessment. At first, he did not expect to encounter such a thing, so he did not bring much with him. Thank you, benefactor, for your great kindness. The crowd expressed their gratitude. Some of the elderly even wanted to kneel down, but they were all stopped by Wuxia. After leaving the slum, Wuxia sighed with worry. Personal strength was always weak. Even if he spent all his wealth, what could he do? The guest house that Wuxia stayed in was not close to the second prince's residence, but if he wanted to go back, he had to pass by there. The further away from the slum, the neater and more luxurious the surrounding houses were. The road under his feet also changed from a muddy dirt road to a neat stone road. It was hard to imagine that such a slum and the courtyard house in front of him would be in the same area. Seeing that there was a majestic guard of honor in front of him, he asked the servant to stop the cart at the side and make way for them. Langjun, the second prince's residence, is on the street ahead. Do you want to make a detour? The servant pushed the cart and asked anxiously. 100 tables of banquets occupied the entire street. Ordinary people were not even allowed to go near, and even the servants could not enter. Let's make a detour, lest we offend the nobles and cause unnecessary trouble. Wuxia lowered his eyes and tightened the two sides of his cloak. He frowned, leaving some wrinkles. The second prince's residence was originally the property of a high-ranking official in Shangjing. Later it was confiscated, and the government gave this area to the second prince. The residence was expanded and renovated. Almost the entire street was within the scope of the second prince's residence, so it would take a lot of time to make a detour. From afar, Wuxia saw the corner door of the second prince's residence open, and buckets of swill were transported to the swill cart. After a long while, the buckets of swill were moved, and the vermilion corner door was quietly closed. From afar, Wuxia heard the servants who were transporting the swill whispering to each other. "Sai, how is this swill? It's obviously buckets of silver. I look at those dishes, they're neat and tidy. Some of them have only been moved a few times, and some of them haven't even been touched. They're just poured into the buckets of swill like garbage. Outside, I don't know how many people are starving to death. Even if these can't be finished and thrown to those people to eat, many people can still be saved." The other cook said, "Do you want to die? What nonsense are you spouting here? If the nobles hear this, it's a small matter. If you lose your job, I'm afraid you might even lose your life. What right do those lowly people outside have to eat what the nobles have eaten? Otherwise, why do they say that people have a golden spoon in their mouths and are born noble, while we are the peasants in the fields, born to be trampled upon? You still have the cheek to talk about me, aren't you also not careful with your words?" The two cooks bickered for a while, then sighed and quietly drove the carriage away from the back door of the residence. When Wuxia heard this, he felt as if he was in an ice house, and cold air rushed from the soles of his feet to his brain. A pair of mocking eyes flashed before his eyes, causing his heart to tighten. "Your Majesty, you're right." Chapter 310. Lu Shi and Jiang Pingji stayed at the Feng residence for a long time, but all good things must come to an end. Time passed and it was time for the two families to part ways. "Lanting, you have to be careful in Langi Academy. Think before you act. Don't be impulsive." Feng Jin thought of Jiang Pingji's gender and wanted to sigh more than once. If his good friend was a man, things would be much easier. Unfortunately, she was a woman and was naturally restricted by her gender. Feng Jin felt it was a pity. "I know. Do I look like the kind of person who causes trouble?" Jiang Pingji said innocently. Feng Jin was silent for a while and said bluntly, "You do." Su Ku, who was standing at the side, almost laughed out loud. He was liking this Feng Langjun more and more. He was straightforward and honest. Jiang Pingji glanced at Su Ku unhappily. "You're helping others." Hui Jun was handed over to Lu Shi. He would send someone to teach her various skills and familiarize her with the rules and etiquette. Lu Shi had already received his appointment letter in Chongzhou. He would be leaving soon, so Jiang Pingji could not go with him. Therefore, before leaving, Lu Shi brought a generous gift to Master Yuanjing and asked him to take care of Jiang Pingji. She was going to study, not to enjoy life. Therefore, there were only 2 people going with Jiang Pingji to Langyi. One was Takshu and the other was Su Ko. As for the servants who would take care of her, they could wait until they reached Langya and find someone to arrange them for them. I've always trusted you. You don't have to force yourself to study in Langyi. Lu Shi looked at his daughter who was growing up. He was filled with emotions. Master Yuanjing is talented. You have to learn from him. If you don't understand, ask. Don't feel troubled or embarrassed. If there are any inconveniences in life, send someone to send a letter to me. Don't make yourself suffer. Lu Shi was not a pretentious person, but looking at his daughter, he felt a little worried. He only had one child. Min's bloodline in this world was only this one. No matter how Lu Shi nagged, Jiang Pingji agreed obediently. The next day, after saying goodbye to Feng Ren, his wife, and Feng Jin, Jiang Pingji sat in the carriage. The coachman gently waved the whip and the wheels turned. Lu Shi also boarded the carriage. His entourage was much larger than Jiang Pingji's. There were more than 100 guards on both sides of the carriage. Nowadays Chongzhou was not stable. They did not know what dangers they would encounter on the road. Bringing more people would increase their safety. As for Jiang Pingji, she could take on a group of people by herself, so she didn't need anyone's protection. That was why she rejected Lu Shi's proposal to assign guards to her. Jiang Pingji suppressed her unnecessary emotions and glanced at the Feng residence where she had been staying for a long time. She lowered the curtain of the carriage and her expression returned to its usual indifference. He leaned against the table and read for a while. When he got bored, he looked up at the bullet screen to kill time. The audience in the streaming room was also affected by the snow disaster some time ago. They were not in a good mood. Most of the bullet screens were greetings, and there was very little content about showing off. Jiang Pingji flipped through the comments page after page, and her lips curled into a sneer. If she was in a bad mood, the system would not be any better. System, I suddenly thought of something. Don't you think there's something strange about the live stream? The roads in the wealthy district of Shangjing were very smooth. Coupled with the powerful shock absorption system of the Lu residence, she almost did not feel the vibration when she sat in the carriage. Ever since the system parted with Jiang Pingji on bad terms, it had not made a sound for a few days. Now that Jiang Pingji took the initiative to talk to it, it felt a little anxious. It felt that it was not a good thing. What's missing? The system asked her. Jiang Pingji looked like she did not care. She flipped through the bullet screen records day after day, starting from today. Because she had a super strong memory, her reading speed was abnormally fast. She looked through the records faster than flipping through a book. I remember you once told me that your full name is Multidimensional Palace Intrigue Streaming System. Not to mention the recent era in the streaming room, even in my interstellar era, the theory of planes has always been one of the scientific research goals pursued by scientists. Jiang Pingji said coldly, but the system's heart skipped a beat. It did not dare to make a sound. It wished it could erase its own existence. If a streaming platform suddenly pops up in the dimension I'm in, and it's proven to be real. Jiang Pingji tilted her head, and the sneer at the corner of her lips made the system shudder. Do you think that a normal government machine or a big force with a certain amount of power would really be indifferent to this? But I've looked through the bullet screen records for so long, and I don't seem to find anything unusual. Jiang Pingji said it lightly, but it was tantamount to a clap of thunder in the ears of the system. After she intimidated the system, she sighed and said, "Can you explain why?" She had always been highly suspicious and wary of the system. What? Because the system was not worthy of her trust. It had too many tricks up its sleeves. She would be a fool to believe it. If she had not tested it several times and confirmed that the audience in the streaming room was real, and that it was indeed connected to another plane, she would have suspected that the audience was fake. The so-called multidimensional streaming system was just an illusion that the system had created by itself. Chapter 311. Wuxia looked at Jiang Pingji in a daze, his mind full of thoughts. The person in front of him was definitely at the top of the list of people he was most afraid of seeing. The scene he saw the day before was still echoing in his mind. He could not calm down no matter what he did. He would always wake up from his nightmares at midnight, sweating profusely. Yesterday he tossed and turned restlessly, unable to fall asleep. He did not have much appetite in the morning, so he only ate some white cake. Coupled with the dark circles under his eyes, people who did not know would think that the white cake was unpalatable. Lu Zheng could usually eat 2 more bowls of rice when he looked at Wei Xi's face, but he had no appetite today. Before he could complain, Master Yuanjing, who had squinted his eyes and moved closer to the bamboo slip, suddenly spoke. Zixiao, there is a distinguished guest at the door. Go out and receive her. Wei Xi did not understand, but looking at Master Yuanjing's slightly squinted eyes, his heart could not help but skip a beat. He had an ominous premonition. He muttered to himself. When he saw Jiang Pingji get out of the carriage, he felt a slight stomachache as if the white cake he had just eaten was rolling in his stomach. Jiang Pingji stepped forward, seemingly not noticing Wei Xi's strange expression, and greeted him. Zixiao, we will be classmates in the future. If I have done anything wrong in the past, I hope that Zixiao will forgive me on account of she's young age. I'm not very good with words and people often misunderstand me. I hope Zixiao will not alienate me because of this. Wei Xi nodded, not daring to speak more. He did not believe the humble words of the person in front of him. She was used to being willful and reckless, doing whatever she wanted to do. If she said, I am not very good with words, hit me if you don't like it, or something like that, he would believe her. Anyway, he could not beat her. Jiang Pingji did not care about his attitude. She raised her hand and untied the rope of the cloak. Wei Xi saw this and subconsciously took a step back. Both of them were silent at the same time. Jiang Pingji thought of something and smiled innocently. She handed the cloak to Takshu, who followed behind her. She did not miss Wei Xi's slightly relieved expression. When she passed by him, she whispered something. That day I lent the cloak to Zixiao to ward off the cold. Although it is not worth much, it is one of she's favorites. Jiang Pingji lied through her teeth. Wei Xi seemed to be facing a formidable enemy. She smiled softly and said, I wonder if I can go to Zixiao's room to get. Before she could finish her sentence, Wei Xi seemed to explode. He took a step forward and walked quickly, looking as if he had been frightened. Jiang Pingji shrugged her shoulders as she faced Takshu and Su Ku, who looked like they had seen a ghost. She looked exactly like a local ruffian. Su Ku was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that the person who had flirted with him was actually his Lang Jun. Since when did you have the hobby of being gay? As if she could read his thoughts, Jiang Pingji said, You're not as good looking as him. Why are you so worried? Su Ku, should he be happy that he was safe or sad that his face was picked on? Takshu, on the other hand, was stunned at first, but she quickly regained her composure. She raised her hand to cover her lips, giggling as she teased. Our Lang Jun has grown up. When spring came, Lu Shi would be 13 years old. In this era, those who were engaged would have gotten married, and those who were not would have gotten engaged. Su Ke secretly rolled his eyes. Jiang Pingji said meaningfully, Yes, he's grown up. After greeting Master Yuanjing, Jiang Pingji was considered a student of Langyi Academy. She could study in the academy in the future. Who is this? Master Yuanjing smiled kindly. His gaze moved from Jiang Pingji to Su Ke. His name is Su Ke. He's my study companion. Su Ke was very nervous. He was like a prisoner waiting for his trial. He was nervous and uneasy. He was afraid that Master Yuanjing would be unhappy with him. He's a good seedling. He can be a great talent. Get up, all of you. Master Yuanjing was like a kind elder. He made people feel close to him. Lanting, have you had your breakfast? Do you want to have some with me? There were 2 plates of white cakes on Master Yuanjing's table. There was a teapot next to him that was boiling hot tea. There was a sweet smell in the air. Su Ke was stunned. He never thought that Master Yuanjing, who was famous in the 9 prefectures, would be so down-to-earth. Normally, when Master Yuanjing invited someone, even if they had eaten, they would have to say that they had not. However, Jiang Pingji did not play by the rules. She spoke bluntly. I've eaten. Master Yuanjing did not expose Jiang Pingji's lie. He turned to Su Ke and asked, Have you eaten too? Su Ke was still confused. He shook his head. He did not know why Master Yuanjing dragged him to eat white cakes. White cakes were a common breakfast in Langyi. However, Master Yuanjing had a unique taste. He ate white cakes with fragrant tea. There were many spices in the fragrant tea. It tasted weird, but the white cakes were dipped in honey. In short, this way of eating was like dipping lychees in soy sauce. Jiang Pingji politely declined. Su Ke was quite happy at first. After eating, his stomach felt uncomfortable. Jiang Pingji had expected it. She looked at Su Ke's bitter expression as if she was watching a show. TSK. I told you to eat whatever you want. Have you learned your lesson? she had a sharp sense of smell. After analyzing the spices in the pot of tea, she knew to stay away from it. However, Suku went to it. How did I know? Master's tea brewing skills are so, he did not know what words to use to describe it. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Master Yuanjing's tea brewing skills are not a problem. However, an old man has a heavy taste. His stomach is not good, so the tea he makes is naturally better for digestion. You were born in Zisong County. The food there is more bland. Naturally, you can't stand it. Suku smacked his lips. There seemed to be an indescribable, strange taste left in his mouth. Although he was flattered to have breakfast with his idol, it was better to eat less of such dark cuisine. Jiang Pingji said, help me pack up. Master Yuanjing and the rest will leave for Langi this afternoon. So soon? Suku was stunned. He thought he could rest for a day or two at the guest house. Not soon. They have been delayed in Shangjing for a long time. Jiang Pingji shook her head in disappointment and said, in the morning my father told me that the imperial court has no time to arrange a place for the scholars. They are to return to their hometown and wait for the decree. The reason was very ready-made. They were busy building relationships with the northern borderline and the marriage of the second prince. How could they care about other trivial matters? What they did not know was that most of the scholars were arrogant people. They were so ambitious that they were given the cold shoulder. They probably did not want to enter the imperial court to be an official. Not everyone liked the intrigue in the officialdom. Instead of fighting in the officialdom, it was better to be a famous scholar and still be famous. A slightly familiar-looking young man walked through the corridor and came to the hall. He bowed to Master Yuanjing. Master, the carriage and dry food are ready. Chapter 312. Meng Heng, the eldest son of Meng Zhan, the county chief of Meng County in Song Prefecture, and the son of Lu Shi's second wife, Gu Zhen. He is now facing the danger of being assassinated. Please accept him. If the mission is completed, the host will be rewarded with a big mystery bag. If the mission is failed, the host will receive a level 1 electric shock as punishment. Jiang Pingji closed her eyes and leaned against the table. She seemed to be taking a nap, but she heard the system's synthesized voice. Meng Heng? She frowned, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Big mystery package? The system coughed softly and said, yes, this is the characteristic of real-time triggered missions. It's similar to a gold chest and the probability of getting something good is very high. I hope that the host can consider this mission. After all, it has been a while since you started a live broadcast mission, so the rewards are limited. As long as we accept Meng Heng and bring him along for a while, it will be considered a success. Jiang Pingji snorted coldly and said, System, you seem to have forgotten. I'm not in charge of the team here, and it's not up to me to decide whether or not we can accept one more person. Although there were many people in the caravan, most of them were frail scholars. If the mastermind really wants to kill Meng Heng, it will definitely bring danger to the convoy. Even if one person is accidentally injured, it will be a great loss. You want me to bet on it? The system was speechless. It tried to persuade Jiang Pingji, but it swallowed the words that were on the tip of its tongue. This host was not someone who could be easily fooled. It knew this very well. In that case, the host can choose to give up the mission. Even if you fail, the punishment is only a level 1 electric shock, which won't affect the host much. However, from the perspective of a system, it would be better for you to accept this mission. After all, Meng Heng is not only Meng Zhan's son, but also the only remaining descendant of your aunt Gu Zhen. He is your cousin. Jiang Pingji pondered for a long time and asked, if I don't intervene, what are the chances of something happening to Meng Heng? The system replied, I've looked at the probability. It's 9 out of 10. Jiang Pingji glanced at the big mystery bag on the mission panel with an odd expression. Don't bother me. I'll think about it. The system said in a businesslike manner, all right, I won't disturb you. She did not seem to have any change on the surface, but she was secretly sneering in her heart. In the end, the system could not hold it in any longer. Jiang Pingji was in no hurry to upgrade the streaming room. She had said earlier that the leveling up of the live stream depended on the upgrade card. If she could not get an upgrade card, she would not level up. It had been more than half a year, and she had been saving up her popularity points like a miser. No matter what the system said, she was unmoved. Why was she like this? Because she had already seen through the system's little tricks. So what if it was a system? To put it bluntly, it was just a bunch of data that thought it was clever. Did it think it could fool a living person like her? Dream on. After a few confrontations, the system did not gain the upper hand. Instead, Jiang Pingji found out more about the other party and knew what popularity points were. To the system, popularity points were the source of its upgrades and daily activities. Perhaps there were even more important uses. If the live stream room did not level up, the number of points gained daily would not increase. It would be fixed at that point. Unfortunately, the system's appetite was gradually increasing. It was like a 3 or 4 month old baby growing into a 1 or 2 year old child. In the past, he only needed a few mouthfuls of milk to fill his stomach. Now he needed a small bowl of muddled paste. Under such circumstances, the upper limit of the number of people in the live broadcast room had to be increased. Only then would the daily popularity points be able to satisfy the system's appetite. How to increase the maximum number of people? There were only 2 ways. One was to use the upgrade card, the other was to pay for the upgrade from the streamer's own pocket. The system claimed that for the sake of the streamer, a small investment would yield a big return. When the upper limit of the number of people increased, the streamer would receive more benefits. However, was Jiang Pingji such a stupid person? If the system was hungry, then let it be hungry. It had nothing to do with her. More importantly, Jiang Pingji suspected that the upgrade of the streaming room did not require that many popularity points. Who knew how much commission the system had received from it? Jiang Pingji could not be bothered to believe a single word the system said. Her solution was to drag it out. Drag it out until the system could not take it anymore and urgently needed more popularity points. Then it would pay for Jiang Pingji's upgrade. In fact, that was how the first upgrade card came about. She dared to bet that the real-time triggered task was meaningless. It was just an excuse for the system to give Jiang Pingji the upgrade card. If she opened the so-called big mystery package, there would definitely be an upgrade card. Ever since Jiang Pingji knew that the system could read her mind, she divided her consciousness into 2. She fooled the system with her superficial psychological activities, and her deeper consciousness was her real intention. Well, she concluded that it did not matter whether she completed the task or not. I'll accept it. Just when the system was feeling uneasy, Jiang Pingji's light words made it cry tears of joy. It was as if it had been granted amnesty. It was rare for the host to be so easy to talk to. Takshu, I'm going to ride the horse for a while. I feel like my waist is going to ache after sitting in the carriage for so long. Jiang Pingji put the hand warmer in her arms and Takshu's arms. She lifted the curtain a little and went out sideways. Soon the curtain was closed. Langjun, remember to put on a cloak so that you won't catch a cold. Takshu stuck her head out and handed a cloak to Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji nimbly got on the horse and took the cloak with one hand. She shook her wrist, and the huge cloak covered her body obediently as if it had eyes. Zuda, look. Young people are full of vitality and aren't afraid of the cold. It's enviable. Master Yuanjing heard the commotion and lifted the curtain slightly to take a look. He smiled with relief. He held a hand warmer in his hand. He wanted to curl up into a ball and he looked like he had put on a lot of weight. Zuda smiled as he fiddled with the silver coals in the charcoal basin. He moved it a little further away so that he wouldn't burn anything. You're old but strong now. You're not inferior to a young person. You were playing on the ice with your friends a while ago. I didn't even dare to go down. Zuda smiled and said shyly, if you say that you're old, I'll be the first to disagree. Master Yuanjing could not help but laugh. Your mouth is getting sweeter every day. I feel like I've lost weight because of what you've said. The previous snowfall had just stopped, and now it was snowing again. The cold wind that blew against their faces was like knives and it hurt their cheeks. Jiang Pingji put on her hood and held the reins with both hands. She urged the horse to run from the back of the group to the front to clear the way. He really can't stay idle? Wuxia was engrossed in his book when he heard the loud sound of horse hooves. He raised his hand to lift the curtain of the carriage, only to see a white figure speeding past the carriage. The cold wind that was stirred up blew on his face, making him feel a little more cheerful. Chapter 313. Wuxia looked at Lu Zheng and laughed. You can even hug a charcoal basin to sleep, how can you still be cold? Lu Zheng was the son of a hunter and had lived in the mountains since he was young. How could he be so afraid of the cold? Of course it's cold. I was afraid of the cold when I was young. Lu Zheng muttered, wishing he could live in the charcoal basin. If he had not experienced the feeling of his hands and feet being frozen, how could he be so afraid of the cold? After hearing this, Wuxia was quiet for a few breaths. His expression was a little nostalgic. Everyone knew that he was the legitimate son of the Wei family, But they did not know that he had a dark period where he was treated coldly by everyone. When the weather turned cold, the room would be as cold as an icehouse. After a winter day, he did not even know where the charcoal portion went and could only hide in his bed in fear. Even after he grew up, his fear of the cold was still deep in his bones. When the weather turned cold, his hands and feet would be extremely cold. How did it improve after that? Zixiao, why are your hands and feet so cold? Come, I'll reluctantly let you hug me. Compared to him who was as cold as ice, someone was as hot as a moving furnace all year round. When Wuxia thought of this, his cheeks suddenly became a little flushed, but it was not obvious because of the ample heating in the carriage. Don't you know how to wear an extra coat? Aren't you afraid of the cold? Wuxia was no longer in the mood to read and murmured to someone. Lu Zheng looked up blankly and suddenly became happy. Zixiao is the best, you know how to be considerate of your brother. As he spoke, he opened Wuxia's suitcase. A thick white fur cloak was neatly stacked on top with a painting on it. Wuxia was speechless. Lu Zheng said, I think this rabbit fur cloak is quite warm, let me wear it for a while. This painting, as Zixiao's painting skills are really good, it's really nice. Lu Xiaoyin, get off the carriage. Lu Zheng was stunned. No matter how ignorant he was, he knew that he seemed to have touched something that should not be changed, so he hurriedly grabbed the carriage door. No, I'm not getting off. Wei Zixiao, you heartless man, if you don't take me in, I'll freeze to death. If I freeze to death, I'll dream of you in the middle of the night and talk to you in detail. Lu Zheng raised his voice like a pig being slaughtered. His attitude of, if you chase me down, I'll fight you to the death, almost made Wuxia collapse in anger. LV Xiaoyin, who once swore to live and die with her old master, refused to bow down even if the city was besieged for half a year and had no food. Was this the kind of person she was? Wuxia deeply suspected that the LV Xiaoyin who submitted 10 letters of surrender, scolded Emperor Qin, and finally sacrificed herself for her master was not the person in front of him. The soundproofing of the carriage was not good, and Lu Zheng's voice was so loud that his classmates in several carriages could hear the commotion. Han Yu heard the commotion and laughed. Zixiao, what have you done to deserve the wrath of the gods? Why are you being called a heartless man? Wuxia was so angry that his face turned red. However, he still had integrity and did not explain. However, Lu Zheng was a shameless fellow. He also did not care about his manners and stuck his head out of the car window. Zixiao should be of marriageable age. He accidentally saw something he shouldn't have seen. Now he's about to silence him. Can Wenbin let Lu Zheng stay for a few days? Han Yu laughed, you can't. If Zixiao wants to silence you, I won't be able to protect you. Jiang Pingji came back from a run. She could not help but frown when she heard their teasing. Isn't it just 1 or 2 pictures of avoiding fire? Why are you so shy? As soon as she said that, Lu Zheng suddenly leaned against the window and laughed. Wuxi's face turned pale. He never expected that Lu Zheng, whom he had little interaction with, would have such a vile nature. Lu Zheng was also a person who knew when to stop. He was very good at reading the situation. Seeing that Wuxia was really angry, he could not help but raise his fist and cough lightly. Zixiao, please forgive me. I was indeed reckless this time. I went too far with the joke. I hope you can be magnanimous and forgive me. Wuxia said stiffly, don't do it again. When Lu Zheng heard this, he was instantly full of vigor. He stared at the picture scroll. Before the advent of paper, scholars mostly used high-quality cloth as the base and splashed ink to paint. Now that there was improved bamboo paper, they slowly switched to paper and this kind of paper picture scroll came into being. Lu Zheng knew that Wuxia was good at many things. There were even rumors in Langya that he was the reincarnation of the previous dynasty's Huangfu of Langya. His literary talent was not inferior to that of Master Yuanjing. In a few years he would even be more outstanding. But rumors were rumors after all. In Lu Zheng's eyes, Master Yuanjing was like an insurmountable mountain. What did Wuxia do to have such a reputation? Now that he saw the content of the picture scroll, he was slightly convinced. The woman sleeping on the flower in the picture scroll was vivid and lifelike. It was as if she would open her eyes in the next second. If it was not for Wuxia's bad complexion, Lu Zheng could not help but feel her breath with his hand to see if she was still alive. The woman was dressed very boldly. Her sleeves were narrow, revealing 2 snow-white wrists. Her skirt could only cover her calves. 2 silver rings hung around her ankles. Her feet were pillowed on the flower petals of the sleeping beauty. It made the redder and whiter the whiter, making one's heart flutter. Why does this person look so familiar? Lu Zheng murmured and stared at the person's face. Wuxia had already taken the picture scroll from his hand and carefully rolled it back. You're seeing things. Wuxia pulled the suitcase over and stuffed the cloak from the top layer to the bottom layer. The picture scroll was even more tightly hidden. Lu Zheng was speechless. He felt that the Wuxia in front of him was very different from the Wei Langjun of the rumors. However, with such good drawing skills, if he really went to draw the fire avoidance painting, wouldn't the scene be so real that one could not bear to look at it? Although it was not the fire avoidance painting to draw such bold content. TSK Wuxia was not a serious person. Haha, unfortunately Wuxia also felt that this Lu Zheng was very different from the Lu Xiaoyin in his memory. Both of them had a tacit understanding. I probably met a fake Lu Xiaoyin Wei Zixiao. After walking for half a day, the servants started a fire to cook. The carriages surrounded an empty space to block the surrounding wind. Jiang Pingji asked the system secretly, "Where is Meng Heng? If you don't tell me where he is, how can I save him?" The system replied, "No hurry, he'll be here soon." Not long after, just as 3 bonfires were set up, a few silhouettes walked over in the distance, braving the wind and snow. Jiang Pingji was still riding on the horse. She said, "I'll go take a look first. I don't know if they're friends or foes." They had already left Shangjing and it was not peaceful outside. It was very easy to meet bandits or people who were being robbed by bandits. Out of caution, Jiang Pingji went to investigate first. Who's in front? Jiang Pingji stopped them on the horse. There were only 3 people in front of them. Judging from their clothes, they should be a servant and 2 guards. The servant bowed to Jiang Pingji and said, "I'm the servant of First Langjun, the chief of Meng County. The road is bumpy and the snow is slippery, so the wheels of the carriage are broken. I don't know what to do now. I saw a bonfire here, so I took the liberty to come and ask for help." Jiang Pingji frowned and asked, "First Langjun of the chief of Meng County? Is he Meng Heng?" The servant said, "Yes, he is my Langjun." Jiang Pingji's cold face warmed up a little. She said, "What a coincidence. My father is Lu Shi from Hejian. If we're talking about relatives, Meng Heng is my eldest cousin. Where is he now? I'll go take a look." When the servant heard Lu Shi's name, he thought it was bad. He did not expect Jiang Pingji to recognize him as her relative. He was relieved. Chapter 314. The system's voice rang in Jiang Pingji's ears the moment she saw Meng Heng. "System, congratulations streamer for completing the real-time mission. Help Meng Heng. You will be rewarded with a big mystery package. Please receive your reward at the backstage." That was it? Jiang Pingji chuckled. The system really couldn't take it anymore. Otherwise it wouldn't be in such a hurry. She looked at Meng Heng calmly. Unlike Meng Heng, who had a delicate appearance, Meng Heng looked rough at first glance. He was dressed in a scholarly robe, which made him look neither fish nor fowl. However, when she looked closely, she felt that he was full of determination. Meng Heng was more of a warrior who was proficient in martial arts than a scholar who was well versed in poetry. She glanced at the thick calluses on his hands. It was the mark of holding a sword and a spear all year round. Even if Meng Heng was not good at martial arts, his body was definitely not weak. "Are you Cousin Heng?" Jiang Pingji informed Master Yuan Jing, then followed the servants and guards to meet Meng Heng. When she first saw Meng Heng, he was still sitting in the carriage wearing a gray cloak. The charcoal in the carriage had long been extinguished, and there was no residual heat. The decorations inside were also simple. He looked like an ordinary scholar from a poor family. She couldn't tell that he was the legitimate son of the Mengs at all. "You are." Meng Heng frowned. He couldn't remember when he had seen Jiang Pingji. "Mother often talks to me about Cousin Heng. She's always worried about your days in the Mengs." Jiang Pingji didn't explain her background, but Meng Heng understood when he heard that. "Your cousin she?" Meng Heng looked at her blankly. He didn't expect that the handsome young man in front of him was the rumored second legitimate son of Lu Shi. When he heard Jiang Pingji mention Gu Zhen, his expression became a little obscure. How has mother been all these years? When Gu Zhen left the Mengs, Meng Heng could barely remember, so he more or less knew what had happened. Because he knew what would happen to Gu Zhen if she didn't leave, Meng Heng didn't have any resentment towards his birth mother. Instead, he respected and pitied her. The Meng's residence was not a good place. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone all the way to Shangjing to study and avoid those messy things. Jiang Pingji said, "I fell seriously ill early this spring. My mother almost didn't make it. However, fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. After I recovered from that serious illness, even some of the ailments I had when I was young were cured. Now I'm living very well." Meng Heng said, "Mother is doing well. Nothing could be better." Jiang Pingji asked him, "I heard from cousin Heng's servant that there's something wrong with the carriage's wheels?" Meng Heng's face flushed with embarrassment. "Yes." Jiang Pingji secretly glanced at the broken wheel and immediately understood where the problem was. It was unknown how many years this carriage had been in service. It had been in disrepair for many years, and the wheels had also been used for many years. It was only now that it could no longer bear the load and was broken. How could the eldest son of the Meng family sit in such an old carriage? It was obvious how hard his days in the Meng family were. Going out on a snowy day, they didn't have enough charcoal in the carriage. Even the clothes they wore were old clothes that had been washed countless times. "If cousin Heng isn't in a hurry, why don't you come with me? We can take care of each other." Jiang Pingji invited him like a naughty 12-year-old. "My mother is so sick that she's unconscious. She often calls out cousin Heng's pet name at the door. Now that we've met, I have to ask you properly. When I go back, I can learn from my mother so that she won't have to worry." Meng Heng's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. It was as if that scene appeared in his mind. He didn't have many memories of his childhood, but he still had an impression of Guzhen. She was such a quiet and beautiful lady, as if she had walked out of a painting. One couldn't help but sigh at the peace of life. Now that she was still thinking about him when she was seriously ill, how could he not be touched? His heart warmed up. He said, "If that's the case, I'll have to trouble you. My mother has remarried many years ago. It's a pity that I haven't visited her. Cousin Shi, can you tell me more about my mother?" "Of course." Jiang Pingji brought 3 carriages with her. She could still spare one for Meng Heng after tidying them up a little. Knowing that Master Yuanjing, who was famous throughout the 9 prefectures, was in the carriages, Meng Heng was stunned. He was so stunned that he couldn't react. "Cousin Shi, have you studied under Master Yuanjing?" "No, Master Yuanjing is very strict when it comes to accepting disciples. I've only studied at Master's Academy for a few years and I've learned a lot." Meng Heng didn't look like a clever person based on his face, but he was very honest with his words and actions. When he heard that his cousin could study at Langyi Academy, he couldn't help but nag a little. It was nothing more than to urge him to study hard and make progress every day. If it was a delicate young man, he would definitely show an impatient look, but Jiang Pingji enjoyed it very much. Meng Heng was like a lotus flower that was bred in the swamp of the Meng's manor. He was very unique. Master Yuanjing's students were very temperamental. Not everyone got along with them. Some classmates had only spoken a few words to each other for a few years. Their friendship was very thin and they were quite averse to outsiders. Meng Heng noticed this, so he spent most of his time in the carriage. He occasionally came out to talk to Jiang Pingji, but he rarely talked to Master Yuanjing's students. After Jiang Pingji completed the triggered mission that was not difficult at all, she ignored the big mystery package in the backstage mailbox. The system couldn't stand it and urged her to open it, but Jiang Pingji said, "I'll open it on an auspicious day when my face is good." "System, I have something to say now." She didn't provoke the system, so she found a chance to ask Wei Ci the next day. "I heard from Master Yuanjing that Zixiao is proficient in the 8 diagrams of changes. Can he read people's faces?" Wei Ci lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked Jiang Pingji with his eyes. What kind of demon was she trying to be? "What do you think of my luck today?" she asked. Wei Ci's face turned green after he heard that. He looked at Jiang Pingji with some unfriendliness. "I'm asking sincerely. I'm not trying to tease you." He continued to look indifferent. "Her glabella is red, and the evil aura won't invade. This is great luck." He had never seen her glabella turn black. Even if the evil aura from outside entered her body, it couldn't suppress the evil aura in her body. Jiang Pingji responded with an "oh," and tightened her grip on the horse's belly. White obediently ran 2 steps forward. Wei Ci, she had enough of pretending. Jiang Pingji finally opened the big mystery package backstage. The package suddenly broke into pieces and floated in the air. Then, like fine sand, they gathered together and formed a golden object. Jiang Pingji pinched it with 2 fingers and made a sound of surprise. "System, look at how red I am." The system was silent. After a while it said, "I'm serving tea to you, lucky queen." She used a little force and crushed the card. A choice popped up in front of her. "Little Angel System warmly reminds you that the host is currently a level 2 streamer. After using the card, you will be promoted to level 3. The number of people online in the streaming room will increase to 50,000. Are you sure you want to use the level up card?" "Yes, B. No." Chapter 315. System Announcement. Congratulations to the host, Jiang Pingji, for leveling up to level 3. The upper limit of the streaming room has been expanded to 50,000 viewers. Clusters of fireworks exploded on the virtual screen, covering the originally sparse bullet screen. The level 2 streaming room had light decorative patterns. After leveling up to level 3, the color of the patterns deepened and became very gorgeous. The audience who had been waiting in line rushed in, increasing the upper limit to 50,000 viewers. The sudden increase in the number of viewers caused the network to lag for a moment. The bullet screen was like an erupting volcano. Zuizhang Beishijing, what happened just now? I feel like the whole screen is lagging like a PowerPoint. Bing Tang Leming, I'm lagging too. I thought the streamer would only be streaming for a short time today. Oh, what did the system announcement mean? Did the streamer finally level up again? Will there be 50,000 viewers watching the stream? Lao Ciji Lianming, seeing the screen full of fireworks, I looked at the interface. The number of viewers has indeed increased to 50,000. Ingtao, I thought the network crashed. I was waiting in line just now and then I suddenly came in. I wanted to complain that it was too difficult to get a spot in the streamer's streaming room. She got it once and then she couldn't get it anymore. Linglong Mibea to Giju, I agree with the previous comment. I have to change several positions to get a spot every day, but I can't get it every time. Dora Aiming, TSK, are you kidding me? How can a normal person's hand speed compete with these guys who have been single for hundreds of years? Nugatang, #picknose. I seriously suspect that their hometown is in the signal tower. Jiang Pingji smiled. Although there were a lot of new viewers, the atmosphere of the live streaming room was not bad. She glanced at it and then looked at the popularity points in the background. She had a plan in mind. After a few tests, Jiang Pingji had a preliminary understanding of the system's weakness. As long as she did not deliberately seek trouble, the system could not escape from her hands. The host and the system were like two people at the opposite end of a seesaw. The popularity points in their hands were the chips in their hands. As long as Jiang Pingji maintained the balance of the seesaw or suppressed the system, the other party could not do anything to it. Instead, it would be forced into a dead end by her. For example, if Jiang Pingji refused to level up, the system could only struggle at death's door. It would get weaker day by day until its energy was exhausted. On the other hand, if Jiang Pingji had less chips than the system, or if she accidentally jumped into the trap designed by the system, what would happen then? She would be caught by the system, and if she wasn't careful, she wouldn't be able to turn the situation around. She would become its puppet and the system could do whatever it wanted to her. If that was the case, why didn't Jiang Pingji seize the opportunity to take down the system? Because only by casting a long line could one catch a big fish. How could a person who achieved great things be attracted by the small profits before him and ignore the real big picture? Jiang Pingji curled her lips into a smile, her eyes brimming with confidence. She wanted to see how much longer the system could endure. Host, I feel like I'm about to break through. After a while, the stiff electronic voice of the system rang in her ears. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Are you going to level up again? Yes. The system replied matter-of-factly, Just like last time, I will try my best to choose the time when the host is not broadcasting to upgrade and maintain myself, so that it will not affect the host's daily broadcasting work. This upgrade is estimated to take 12 hours. Jiang Pingji nodded in approval. Before the system could heave a sigh of relief, she said, Actually, I have something to discuss with you. I want to start the second fusion of forces. System, the other end of the line was silent for a long time. Jiang Pingji almost suspected that the system was pretending to be deaf and mute, but it finally responded. Do you want to fuse forces now? The system asked. Yes, it will cost 1 million points of popularity. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and clenched her fist, her expression turning cold. This world is so chaotic. If I don't have strength, I'm not even comparable to a rootless duckweed. I'm still too weak now. Only by becoming stronger can I protect everything. The system deliberated for a while. The host's current basic force is 12 points, and the fusion force is 39 points. This combined data has far exceeded that of an ordinary person and is almost close to the critical value. The higher the level, the more points of popularity required to increase the value by 1 point. Previously, you could increase the fusion rate by 0.1% with 10,000 points. Now that you have 1 million points, you can't even reach 1%. Jiang Pingji knew that even without the system saying it, I'm mentally prepared for this. The system continued, As a qualified system, I have the obligation to remind you of one thing. Previously, it was only 10,000 points of fusion. Increasing from 30 points of fusion force to 31 points is equivalent to taking a small step for a child. Now it's directly 1 million points. The leap is too big. So, Jiang Pingji asked the system. The safest thing to do is to fuse them in batches. That will minimize the risk. Jiang Pingji pretended to think seriously, but in the end she rejected the system's suggestion. No need. Since I've chosen to take the risk, I naturally have a certain level of confidence. Isn't it just a gamble with my life? I don't think I'll be easily defeated. Jiang Pingji had learned the term defeated from the audience in the streaming room. Don't worry about me. The system's suggestion was good, but Jiang Pingji knew that it would not be as easy to talk to as it was now. It was highly likely that it would turn from guest to host. Haha, didn't the system do the same after its first upgrade? It used the mission of saving Meng Liang to test and threaten her. If she had not resisted it, the situation would have been different. Therefore, she needed to increase her bargaining chips before the system's second upgrade. System, who the hell would worry about you? It was snowing heavily now. The snow from before had melted and turned into ice. The road was very difficult to walk on. To ensure safety, they set up several bonfires in the open area and prepared to spend the night there. Jiang Pingji instructed Takshu and rode into the forest. Even Jiang Pingji didn't dare to say that she could easily endure the pain of the fusion of force. If they did it in the carriage, it might cause a commotion. It would be hard to explain if someone saw her grimacing and in pain. This is fine. Jiang Pingji's night vision was excellent. She rode White to the nearest stream. Host, are you sure you want to use 1 million points to continue the fusion? Yes, B, think about it. Decisively choose A. With the previous experience, Jiang Pingji was not anxious. Instead, she sat quietly by the stream and waited for the fusion to begin. As expected, after a few breaths, a sharp pain without warning swept through her body. It was fierce and intense, completely different from the first fusion. She secretly gritted her teeth and grabbed the pebbles by the stream with both hands. She clenched her fingers so hard that she left finger marks on them. The moonlight was as cold as water. When it fell on her face, it reflected a ghastly white color. She looked like a lifeless ghost. The color of her lips turned from green to purple. Because of the pain, her eyeballs were wide open. The corners of her eyes hurt as if they were about to split open. Chapter 316. Kacha. The pebble in Jiang Pingji's hand shattered. Her fingertips split open and blood stained the gravel. She curled up in pain. Her consciousness was attacked by waves of pain, but she still stubbornly held on to the last trace of clarity. Her lower lip was bitten and there were several teeth marks. She could not help but groan from the corner of her mouth. In just a few breaths, wriggling blood-colored snakes slowly flowed out of her eyes, nostrils, and ears. The air gradually filled with the smell of blood. White was an intelligent warhorse from the northern borderline. Jiang Pingji's current situation made it anxious. Its hooves kept rubbing against the ground. Plop. The sound of a heavy object falling into the water was heard, causing a large splash. It turned out that Jiang Pingji's entire body had fallen into the stream. White snorted and anxiously circled a few times on the spot. Then it turned its head and ran out the way it came from. It was already late at night. Except for the servants and boy servants on night duty, most of the people were already asleep. The scholars who liked to read at night were still in the carriage reading slowly by candlelight. Lu Jing fell asleep after eating and drinking. He grabbed the bedding and rolled himself into a spring roll. Wei Ci wore a cloak and leaned against the carriage to read carefully. Perhaps it was because he had had a different experience, but now that he was going back and reading these familiar contents, he actually had a different understanding of them. Seriously. After reading a book, Wei Ci gradually felt sleepy. Just as he was about to sleep with his clothes on, he saw Lu Jing sprawled out on his back. His sleeping posture was extremely carefree and took up more than half of the carriage, making him feel as if he had nowhere to put his feet. He should not have taken in Lu Jing, who was friendly with him. Who knew that his sleeping posture was so bad? He despised it. Is there the sound of horse hooves? He was about to wake Lu Jing up when he vaguely heard something. He lifted the curtain of the carriage. There was no movement from the servants on night duty outside. He could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. He muttered in a low voice. Maybe I heard wrongly. After a while, the servant on night duty stood up. He widened his eyes and said, "Isn't that Lu Longjuan's horse?" White's whole body was snow white. There was not a single strand of hair. It was vigorous and it was a warhorse from the northern borderline with excellent bloodlines. It was very eye-catching at night. Lu Langjun? Upon hearing this form of address, Wei Si's heart skipped a beat. He put on the cloak that was draped over his shoulders and tightened it around him. Then he took the hand warmer and alighted from the carriage. What happened? There were 5 servants on night watch, and one of them had already stepped forward to take the reins from Big White's neck and lead the agitated Big White over. Your servant doesn't know either. It seems like something happened when the horse came from that direction. Wei Si frowned and stepped forward. Big White rubbed its head against his chest and snorted a few times, looking very impatient. Could it have discovered something? Wei Si raised his eyebrows, an ominous premonition rising in his heart. This horse was naturally arrogant. During the day many people looked at it enviously. No matter how much they tried to please it, it was too lazy to bite them. If Dabai had discovered something, he would have gone to find his master instead of wasting time with an outsider. You guys stay here, I'll follow the horse to take a look. If I don't come back in an hour, then inform master and the others. Although Wei Si was a scholar, he was also proficient in the 6 arts of a gentleman. His horsemanship and archery skills were not as good as those of a military general, but they were not just for show. Sorry for offending you. Take me to your master. Wei Si stroked Big White's mane, grabbed its reins and flipped onto the horse's back. Surprisingly, Big White did not throw him off. Looking at Big White and Wei Si, the servants looked at each other and could only do as they were told. The stream was not very far from where the carriages were camping. It would only take a quarter of an hour to travel back and forth on Big White. Wei Si thought that something had happened to Jiang Pingji. He was so scared that his lips turned white. He almost got thrown off by Big White. However, there were many trees in front of him so he could not see clearly. But he was not deaf. The sound of the water was clearly. Before Wei Si came over, Jiang Pingji had already woken up from the stream. She was in good spirits but her legs were still weak. It was difficult for her to even lift her fingers. Relying on her good health, she simply soaked in the cold stream water to adjust her breathing. She found that there were many bloodstains on her skin. She raised her hands and splashed the water on her arms and neck. She used her clothes to clean the bloodstains. Hearing the familiar sound of horse hooves, Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows but did not turn around immediately. Who is it? She asked. Her voice was hoarse and languid. Separated by the trees, Wei Si shifted his gaze to another place, but his ears were slightly red. Your horse ran to the campsite just now. I thought that something had happened to you so I rushed over, Jiang Pingji said. I found the stream here clean during the day so I sneaked over to take a bath in the middle of the night. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, Zixiao. Wei Si's face was livid. He stood beside Big White, not knowing whether to leave or stand. Since you're fine, it's not convenient for me to stay here any longer. Others did not know Jiang Pingji's gender but Wei Si knew. He did not intend to let others know that he knew. Wait a minute. Jiang Pingji stopped Wei Si and said embarrassedly, I sneaked out and left in a hurry. I forgot to bring a change of clothes. Can I trouble Zixiao to bring Big White back and ask Takshu to help prepare a set of clothes? Hang it on Big White's horse ornament. It will send it over. Wei Si's expression was completely unsightly. So, Big White didn't run to the campsite to ask for help, but to bring a set of clothes for Jiang Pingji? He glanced at Dabai. Dabai also turned around and looked at him innocently with its big watery eyes. Wei Si's face was cold. He turned over and mounted the horse. I understand. He always felt that all his worries seemed to have been fed to the dogs. Big White snorted and the horse galloped away. It was not as hurried as when it came. Hearing the sound of the horse's hooves getting further away, Jiang Pingji heaved a sigh of relief. She raised her head and leaned against the stream. The stream was flowing. It was not frozen but it did not hinder its bone-chilling coldness. Fortunately, this kind of coldness was nothing to Jiang Pingji now. Looking at her personal attributes panel, she smiled weakly. She did not care about other things but basic strength, 31 points, combined strength plus 56 points, was enough to prove that she had made the right choice. She raised her hand to look at her arm. On the surface, there did not seem to be many changes, but she could feel the power contained within. After washing a little with the stream, Big White ran over with a bag of clothes on its back. Seeing that the lower edge of the clothes was close to the ankles, Jiang Pingji frowned. The clothes are a little small. She knew that this was due to the increase in her height. After the combined strength, the jeans would also slowly be optimized. Her height was a little longer, which was also the external appearance after the optimization. Fortunately, the change was not big. Moreover, this body was only 12 years old. It was not even 13 years old yet, so it was normal for it to grow quickly. Apart from that, there was another advantage to this change. Due to physiological reasons, females were on average much shorter than males. This was especially true for Luxi's body. Now that she had grown taller, her height would not be too conspicuous when she appeared in men's clothing. Jiang Pengji tucked her wet hair behind her head and turned over to mount the horse. Chapter 317. Langya was indeed a place of outstanding people. It was still chilly in other places, but here the wind was already warm and the flowers were blooming. It was early spring and the scenery was perfect. The spring wind blew on people's bodies, stirring up some lazy warmth. The girl who loved to be beautiful had already changed into light spring clothes. The fresh and tender colors made her look more delicate than flowers. Her black hair was tied up high, decorated with 1 or 2 blooming flowers. Even if she didn't put on any makeup and didn't wear any makeup, she still couldn't hide her vigorous youthfulness. Girls loved to be beautiful, and the young Langjuns were no exception. Their clothes fluttered in the wind, and their sleeves carried a light fragrance. Jingle, jingle. A few bells knocked against each other rhythmically, following the vigorous steps of the horses. The crisp sound of the bells accompanied the sound of the horses' hooves, like a cheerful song. Anyone who heard it could feel the owner's leisurely and contented mood at the moment. A commotion came from the city gate, and people could faintly be heard discussing and cheering among the crowd. Is that the big worm that ate people in Zhangjiang village? It looks scary. Yes, look at its size, it must be at least 6 stones. No wonder it could eat so many people and cause so much harm that even the government can't do anything about it. My wife is from Zhangjiang village. I heard that this big worm has eaten 4 children. The parents of the children went into the mountains to get rid of it, but they were eaten until only bones were left. I don't know how to describe that horrible scene. Just looking at it makes me shiver and my legs go weak. Many people gathered on both sides of the street to see what was going on. They were whispering to the tiger that was carried by 4 strong men. At this time, a slightly smaller tiger was carried in. Those who were knowledgeable immediately recognized that it was a female tiger. Wow, I thought it was a big worm that harmed Zhangjiang village. I didn't expect it to be a couple, a male and a female. Not only that, look at the stomach of that female worm. It's abnormally shriveled, like a female horse that just gave birth. The crowd was in a heated discussion. The customers in the tea houses on both sides heard the commotion below and poked their heads out. They were shocked by the 2 dead insects. Even though they were already dead, the power of their bodies was still enough to make people's souls fly out of their bodies. From the outside, the 2 tigers looked very complete, and there was dried black blood in their eyes. Even if they were not experienced hunters, everyone knew how the 2 tigers died. Someone must have shot him in the eye with an arrow, piercing through his brain and killing him on the spot. His technique was clean and neat, and he did his best to ensure the integrity of the 2 tiger skins. Many commoners were envious of him. A scholar said, "It's rare to see such a majestic insect. I don't know who the person who killed him is, but he is said to be incomparably brave." You don't know? His friend was surprised. He leaned against the window of the tea house on the 2nd floor and looked outside as if he was looking for someone. What's wrong? Is there something I don't know? His friend smiled elegantly and said, "If these 2 big insects were really harming Zhangjiang village, the one who killed them must be that person." What do you mean? The scholar was puzzled. You might not know, but didn't the county governor organize a gathering a few days ago and invite all the scholars to discuss the world situation? The scholar was still suspicious and said, "That day I got a little sick and caught a cold, so I didn't go over. I wonder what happened at the gathering?" His friend smiled and closed his fan in a carefree manner. He sighed and said, "That day at the gathering, a scholar said that military men bring disaster to the country. He said that Nanxing was almost destroyed by the 4 factions of Nanman. Other than the fact that the 4 factions of Nanman were powerful, the other reason was that the king of Nanxing trusted the military too easily. This caused the court to be unstable and the internal problems were not solved. The 4 factions of Nanman took advantage of the situation and attacked the city. Although Nanxing was also Dongqing's enemy, they were brothers of the same father. They would not feel comfortable if they were attacked by outsiders. Whether it was Nanxing or Dongqing, they were not willing to admit that Nanxing's territory was cut off again and again because they were weak. Once upon a time, the Xia dynasty annexed the 9 states and brought peace to the 4 seas. No one in the 9 states dared to oppose them. How majestic was that? The 5 states were all split from the Xia dynasty. They all claimed to be legitimate and had 5 sons from the same father, who was willing to admit that they were defeated by the foreign races because they were weak. It must be because they were careless and had hidden dangers, so outsiders took advantage of them. The blame was pushed back and forth, and in the end it was the generals. Unlike Dongqing, which valued culture and restrained martial arts, Nanqing's attitude towards martial arts was still acceptable. According to Dongqing's harsh standards, Nanqing's treatment could even be considered as generous. However, the monarch of Nanqing courted disaster. After forming a marriage alliance with the 4 factions of Nanman, he directly and indirectly caused the deaths of many generals who were truly loyal to the monarch. He handed over the military power to his own relatives and eunuchs who were worthy of trust. However, these people secretly colluded with the 4 factions of Nanman for some benefits. Nanqing's army was fighting at the front lines. Whatever deployment they made, the confidant of the monarch of Nanqing would sell this information to the 4 factions of Nanman. Under such circumstances, they could still win unless the 4 factions of Nanman were all blind and fought by instinct. Anyway, no matter what, the blame was unanimously pushed to the generals. This indirectly caused Dongqing to suppress the generals even more. The scholar listened to his friend's retelling and felt that there was nothing wrong with this. However, he still could not understand. What did the conflict at the assembly have to do with the big worm? His friend continued. That scholar had just finished speaking when someone smashed a cup on his head. His forehead was bleeding. The scholar sucked in a breath of cold air. This was an assembly organized by the county chief, who had the guts to make a move in public. How dare he make a move? His friend explained to him, saying, not only did that person make a move, he even said something impudent, almost angering that scholar to the point that 1 Buddha was born and 2 Buddhas ascended to heaven. Guess what that person said? The scholar's interest was instantly piqued. He asked, what did he say? His friend thought about it and imitated the person's tone. You're just a chicken. Don't talk about smashing a cup on you. Even if someone slashed you twice, you'd still come back for me to see. You're eloquent with your words, but you're just an embroidered pillow that looks good but is useless. If you have the energy to talk here, why don't you go home and recuperate? Don't let your wife complain that you can't lay eggs again. When the scholar heard this, he suddenly felt a toothache. These words are too vicious. His friend nodded in agreement as if he had just survived a disaster. It was not vicious at all. The situation was almost out of control. That scholar had abandoned his manners and rolled up his sleeves, ready to fight with his life. Needless to say, that scholar did not gain any advantage. Chapter 318. The scholar thought about it carefully. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with what he said. But the problem was, did this matter have anything to do with the 2 big insects? His friend continued, because the troublemaker Lang Jun has some background, the county chief did not want to make a big deal out of it. He hoped that the 2 of them could settle their grievances privately. The troublemaker said, yesterday I heard from the girls in Wangchun Tower that there were man-eating insects in Zhangjiang village that were harming the people. Do you think that your mouth is so scary? Why don't we make a bet? Let's see if your mouth can kill those insects or if the bow in my hand can make them die. You always trample on martial artists. How did the founder of Dongqing start his career? Forgetting his ancestors. The scholar smacked his lips. He suddenly felt that although the troublemaker Longjuan's mouth was a little poisonous, he was a real person. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that he had the guts to kill the insects as a bet showed how heroic he was. Then these 2 big insects, were they hunted by that Langjun? Probably 8 or 9 out of 10. His friend nodded. I have a good friend studying at Langi Academy. He has heard about that person. He was born with great strength and was strong enough to lift a cauldron. It is not impossible for him to kill 2 big insects. On the other hand, I heard that the scholar has been loitering in the brothel. He is lazy and has a lot of wives and concubines in his backyard. He can't even ride a horse or draw a bow, let alone kill the insects. As soon as he finished speaking, a few strong men had already carried the 2 tigers onto the street with some difficulty. The people on both sides of the street were curious. It was as if a cat was scratching their hearts, but they did not dare to go forward for fear that the tigers would come back to life. Ding ding. The crisp sound of the bell was even clearer. It came from afar. The scholar could not help but open his eyes wide and stared at the source of the sound. A teenager who was about 15 or 16 years old was leisurely sitting on the back of a horse. He did not even hold the reins. The horse he was riding on was snow white with strong limbs. What a handsome warhorse! The scholar sighed. The teenager on the horse seemed to have heard his compliment. He looked up and caught his gaze, which made the scholar a little embarrassed. At this moment he finally saw the young man clearly. It was different from the wide-sleeved Confucian robes that scholars like to wear nowadays. The sleeves were very narrow, but it was also different from what the foreign tribes wore. From the appearance alone, it still retained the distinct characteristics of Dongqing. It should have been modified from the basis of the Confucian robes to make it more convenient for movement. The young man wore a simple and neat silver ring around his neck. 2 sachets and other accessories hung from his waist. He wore a pair of brown, wide-toothed wooden clogs and a pair of snow-white socks. The weather was not very warm, and people with weak bodies would need to put on 2 more spring clothes before going out. However, this young man did not seem to notice, and his clothes were light and simple. Looking at the young man's face again, his dark and heroic eyebrows were slightly raised, making his entire face look lively. As for those eyes, it was unknown whether it was a psychological effect, but when the scholar met the other party's gaze, he suddenly felt guilty and wanted to avoid it. It was as if he could see through everything and no one dared to look at him directly. The bridge of his nose was high and his thin lips were slightly curled. He seemed to be smiling but did not, giving people a sense of closeness. Even the most picky person could only say that he was a handsome young man when looking at this plain face without any makeup. The snow-white warhorse was also extraordinary. There was a bloody bow and arrow on the horse's back. Even though it was surrounded and discussed by so many people, it did not move at all. It was like it was taking a leisurely stroll, and its owner seemed to be at ease with the reins. The man and the horse were actually such a good match. As the scholar thought about it, he suddenly realized that the young man was holding something in his arms. Ah, that's the cub of the big worm. The people with sharp eyes widened their eyes. They realized that the thing in the young man's arms was wriggling slightly, and a head popped out. It looked like a milk cat, with its eyes slightly closed and its mouth contentedly, as if it was very comfortable to be held by the young man. However, if one looked closely, they would realize that it was not a milk cat at all, but a tiger cub that had just been born a few days ago. The young man did not care about the discussions of the people around him. He let the strong men carry the 2 tigers all the way to the door of a certain house. The young man looked at the plaque hanging on the door of the house. There were 2 gatekeepers outside looking in curiously. She rolled up her horsewhip and pointed it at the plaque. She said arrogantly, "Walk around this house a few times. Every time you walk around you'll pay 6 more coins." The scholar and his friend, urged by their curiosity, also came over to watch the show. Seeing the young man's actions, they were suddenly stunned. The scholar felt like he was dreaming. He murmured, "This is too arrogant." Even if he was stupid and did not know who the owner of the house was, he could guess some things just by looking at the young man's actions. It turned out that the owner of the house was the family of the scholar that was choked by the young man that day, right? Asking the strong men to carry the 2 tigers around the house to show off. This was a slap in the face right at the door of the house. So arrogant, why don't you go to heaven? Haha, if the audience in the streaming room could hear the inner voice of the scholar, they would probably chuckle. Their streamer had always been arrogant. She stayed in the sky and never came down. Yes, the young man on the horseback was Jiang Pingji. Lao Ciji Lianming, #propping chin. The streamer always causes trouble. This unlucky child is probably so scared that he doesn't dare to jump out. Chun Lai, haha, although it's not the first time I've seen the streamer being arrogant, every time I see it I feel especially good. Dashu Xiaobing, #picking nose. What can I do? His brain is filled with too much water. The streamer is just kind enough to beat the water out of his brain. You didn't see the situation at Tianya gathering. The more you talk, the more you go overboard. It was the Nanxing king's own fault, but he has to deceive himself and push the blame onto others. Just wait and see, the current Dongqing will soon follow in Nanxing's footsteps. The bullet screen in the streaming room was densely packed. The virtual screen was more than twice as big as before. The decorations on the frame of the streaming room were also more complicated and gorgeous. Jiang Pingji rode on the horseback. She held the horsewhip in her right hand and lightly tapped the palm of her left hand. After the few strong men walked 2 rounds around the huge house, Jiang Pingji sneered softly. "This is courage? What a joke." Jiang Pingji pointed at the door and said to the surrounding people who were watching the show, Anyone with a bit of courage should rush out with a group of servants. Even if they can't win, they have to vent their anger. If everyone in Dongqing is a coward, Nanxing will be a good example. Fight with me? Pick up your own bones first, then talk. Coward. Let's go home. Jiang Pingji cracked the whip in the air with a cold face. Then, under her control, the snake-like whip obediently retracted. That was a beautiful move. She laughed heartily and bowed to the people around her. The skin of these two big worms is not bad. It can be used to make a tiger skin cloak. As for the meat, if the people in the village care about it, they can come over and have a taste. Some people knew Jiang Pingji, but some didn't. Which family's Langjun is this? Jiang Pingji's sharp ears heard them. She turned her head to look in that direction and spoke to the people who spoke. Chapter 319. Those families with ordinary backgrounds would only be able to taste some meat during festivals or on important days. Most of them would be raising their own hens. They wouldn't even be willing to go to the market to buy pork, let alone eating the meat of the giant worm. The audience in the streaming room saw that Jiang Pingji got someone to skin the two tigers and divide their meat on the spot. To Ciji Jiwu, host, are you kidding me? If you did this to us, you would be called over for tea. To Do Nyo Gafen, wild animals are now protected by the country. Host, what you did was not just inviting them over for tea. You got shot, okay? But in the host's world, people hunt based on their abilities. If they like to eat, they eat. There's nothing wrong with that. Lao Ciji Lianming, ha ha ha, you're saying that the host doesn't love animals? She doesn't even love humans. If she gets mad, she'll twist off a human's head for you to see. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, they're just a group of indignant keyboard warriors. Didn't you see that the host has been too lazy to care about them for so many years? The more I care about them, the more they jump around. Ignoring them makes me proud. To put it bluntly, if the host was not in a different dimension from them, but in the same world, they wouldn't even dare to fart if they had the chance to face her, let alone scold her with the keyboard. Cafeteria auntie, you're just a group of idiots. You're using your own way of thinking to judge people from another world. Are you crazy? Didn't you see the introduction clearly? These two tigers ate so many people and caused harm. The host is saving people by killing them. As for skinning and selling their meat, are the chicken, duck, and fish you eat everyday vegetarian dishes? You're overflowing with love and there's nowhere to vent it. What do fu do? If you have the time to scold here, why don't you turn around and search for fur? A group of people who are more sages than saints. The audience had just sent the message over when a bunch of insults and crusades came from behind. In Hua Nation, where the audience was from, people would even criticize a certain place for eating dog meat, let alone a live broadcast of hunting a tiger, manually skinning it, and even publicly dismembering the tiger couple's carcasses and giving them to the people as a dish for dinner. Cruel and inhumane. Yishuang Zhuzi, I can't stand it anymore. I've never seen such a cruel executioner. Do you even have the heart to hunt animals? Animal Protection Association. Skinning? That's so cruel. Didn't the country advocate that if there was no trade, there would be no killing? How could this kind of dog food like live broadcast room be open for so long and not be blocked by 404? I have already reported you to the top right, no thanks. A bunch of big grapes. There will be retribution for killing animals. I hope that the host's entire family dies, that her sons become eunuchs, and that her daughters become prostitutes. Host is a pig. You're a beast worse than a pig or a dog. This kind of trash host should just die. Host is spicy chicken. Go to hell. Go to hell. Go to hell. These insults were still considered light, but the content of the more excessive greetings to the 18 generations of ancestors was extremely unbearable to look at. Jiang Pingji couldn't be bothered with him and didn't open her mouth to refute. Just as the other livestream viewers had said, the more they paid attention to these clowns, the more they jumped. Jiang Pingji had always dealt with it coldly. In other words, her brain simply could not process the information that was even more worthless than rubbish. However, her fans who supported her would not give up. They directly started a war of words in the streaming room, and it became a chaotic mess. Regarding her good mentality, a viewer who had followed the streaming room for more than 3 years sighed with emotion. Pepsi Cola, I suddenly have a lot of respect for the host's psychological ability. Nowadays, online violence is getting more and more severe. Many bright and beautiful public figures have been forced to suffer from depression because of the pressure of public opinion. The host has been cursed by the keyboard warriors for more than 3 years, but her mentality is still so good. Jiang Pingji was using a lotus to wrap up the meat that had been divided and distributed to the people who came to join in the fun. She caught a glimpse of this from the corner of her eye and suddenly smiled. Host V, it's not that I have a good mentality. In fact, my temper is very bad. The reason why I didn't refute them is because they haven't completely evolved. Why should I care about the language of a group of non-human beings? Secondly, if the feces in the toilet stinks you, will you step on them or bite them? The most correct solution is to flush it directly. Why bother so much? It was also because they were in different dimensions. If they were face to face, she would beat up the whole family of those who dared to speak rudely to her. Naturally, Jiang Pingji's arrogant words and actions directly touched the sensitive points of those people. They wished they could stay in the streaming room 24 hours a day and use all kinds of unbearable words to greet her. Jiang Pingji calmly divided all the meat and even gave the bones to the people to take home to make soup. She didn't spare any attention to them at all. As for the 2 intact tiger skins, they would be taken care of when they got home. She placed the 2 tiger skins on the back of the horse and rode White back leisurely. She bought a small courtyard with 2 entrances in Langyi. It was very close to Langyi Academy, so it was convenient for her to go to school or visit friends and relatives. Langjun, you're back. As soon as she arrived at the door was already opened and a gatekeeper in brown clothes walked out. She threw White's reins to the gatekeeper. Yes, White ran a lot today. Feed it more high-quality horse grass. White seemed to understand her words. It happily snorted and wanted to stretch its head to rub against her. Don't worry, Langjun. Your servant will do it now. Oh yes, find a skilled craftsman to deal with these 2 tiger skins. I plan to give them to my sister as a dowry. The tiger skin was not very expensive, but the 2 tiger skins that Jiang Pingji peeled were very good. They were bright and shiny, which was really rare. Even if they were given to Lu Shi's daughter as a dowry, it would not be embarrassing. It would be a good story to say that a brother took care of his sister. The gatekeeper listened and valued it even more. He did not dare to neglect it. Jiang Pingji was humming a light song. She was in a good mood. Takshu, are the luggage ready? As soon as she entered the door, Takshu came out to greet her. There was a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. It's ready. The things to bring to the second Yangtze are also ready. Takshu was wearing a simple dress. She was even more beautiful now. She had the charm of a mature woman. Langjun, you're back from hunting. Do you want to have a hot bath? There's no hurry. I'll bathe later. Jiang Pingji took Takshu's handkerchief and wiped her face. Wuma Jun has been getting more and more attention from the government these years. He has become the most favored son besides the crown prince. The court officials are all watching him. My sister is going to marry him and become his wife. The Lu family can't slack off. The dowry doesn't need to be outstanding, but it can't be a joke. Chapter 320. Langyi was a prosperous place with a good business atmosphere. There were many good things there. Coincidentally, Jiang Pingji had been studying in Langyi for 3 years. The second lady wrote a letter to Jiang Pingji to help with the preparations. It was also to show that the Lu residents valued the concubine's daughter and the marriage. Because Lu Shi was in Chongzhou, he had no time to send the concubine's daughter off. This task naturally fell on Jiang Pingji's shoulders. Of course, even if Lu Shi was free, he would not give the concubine's daughter so much face. Moreover, she was not even his daughter. Taksha sighed. Langjun treats the second Yangtze so well. Jiang Pingji listened and smiled without saying a word. Would she treat a concubine's sister well that she had never met? Tiske, a weasel paying a visit to a chicken. What good intentions could there be? It was definitely not a good thing for a concubine's sister to marry Wuma Jun. Looking at Taksha's graceful figure leaving, Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. The audience in the streaming room drooled. Lao Ciji Lianming, it's a pity. If the streamer was a man, such a delicate beauty could be kept in the room. Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, #picknose. The streamer is not such a crazy person. Do you think everyone thinks with their lower body? Panda Sai, I also think it's a pity. She's such a beauty and she grew up with the streamer. Instead of marrying out and being defiled by the men of this era, it's better for the streamer to protect her. I think no one is better than the streamer. Faced with the stream of emotions, Jiang Pingji could not help but laugh. What was that saying again? The green bamboo snake's mouth, the wasp's tail in battle. Some blessings could not be enjoyed. As she was thinking, Takshu, who had already left, entered the room again. She bowed and said, Langjun. Wei Langjun came to the residence to send a visitation card. Zixiao? What is he doing here at this hour? Jiang Pingji's brows furrowed. She secretly thought about Wei Xi's purpose for coming to the residence. In the 3 years that she studied in Langyi Academy, she had almost no interaction with Wei Xi. He had his own circle of friends. Jiang Pingji would not take the initiative to get close to him. Moreover, he would go out for half a month to visit relatives and friends. They did not meet each other much. More than half a month ago, she vaguely heard the students of Langyi Academy mention that Wei Xi had gone out again. Calculating the time, she reckoned that he had just returned. Why would he come to her residence to send a visiting card? With that in mind, she did not let them wait for long and went straight to the reception pavilion to meet Wei Xi. Jiang Pingji sat down on the master's seat and said with a smile, "What a rare guest. Zixiao actually took the initiative to come to my humble abode." 3 years had passed and Wei Xi was now a young man in his early 20s. Compared to 3 years ago, he looked more handsome. Probably because of the long journey, he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. The green clothes on his body actually seemed a little empty. Upon hearing the teasing, Wei Xi covered his mouth with his hand and coughed lightly. The voice was slightly hoarse and nasal. It seemed that this person was not only tired from the long journey, but also not feeling well. "Did you catch a cold or something? Why don't you get a doctor to take a look?" Wei Xi shook his head and slowed down his breathing, suppressing the urge to cough. However, the green color under his eyes added a sickly look to his face. No matter how one looked at it, he did not look fine. He said, "I'm fine. It's just that I accidentally caught a cold the day before yesterday and am feeling a little unwell." Jiang Pingji nodded and waited for Wei Xi to state the purpose of his visit. Sure enough, Wei Xi had his own purpose for visiting. "Lanting, I heard that you're going to send off your sister's marriage to Shangjing?" After all, they were classmates in the academy. Wei Xi did not call Jiang Pingji so distant. Instead, he called her by her courtesy name like others did. "This matter, if it can be avoided, try your best to avoid it." Jiang Pingji was puzzled and asked, "Zixiao must have his reasons for saying this. I don't know why, but why can't I go?" Wei Xi said, 3 years ago the government sent troops to help Nanxing. On the surface, it seemed that they were fighting and repelling the 4 factions of Nanman together with the other countries. In reality, the 4 factions of Nanman had no intention of destroying Nanxing. They only took the opportunity to retreat and occupy the conquered counties. They took the opportunity to recuperate and plan for the future. At the same time, this was also an extremely vicious plan to sow discord. Jiang Pingji said, "I know about this matter. The 4 factions of Nanman stopped their attacks not because they were really defeated, but because they gave Nanxing a chance to breathe. At the same time, they disintegrated the reinforcements of the other 4 countries and provoked a conflict of interest between the other 4 countries and Nanxing. Although the other 4 countries sent troops to help Nanxing defend the last of their territory, they did not run a relief society. There was a price to pay for sending troops to help. After Nanxing was defeated, not only did they have to face all kinds of conditions from the 4 factions of Nanman, but they also had to give benefits to the reinforcements of the other 4 countries. The other 4 countries sent troops to help in name, but they also had the intention to take advantage of them. However, in the beginning, Nanman attacked ferociously. They were united against the enemy. Later, Nanman stopped attacking, and the internal reinforcement alliance was in chaos. This matter was known to the whole world, but all the countries pretended to be peaceful and righteous. They did indeed fool many fools. "But what does this matter have to do with me sending off my sister's marriage?" Wei Xi choked and lowered his eyelids. His expression was slightly silent. Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry. She waited for him to speak. When the spring plowing is over, Nanman will definitely make a big move. Nanxing is probably going to perish. Next, Dongqing will face the predicament of being attacked from both the north and the south, Wei Xi said. The external threat is so obvious, but there are also many internal problems. The situation in Shangjing is extremely serious. It is almost to the point of being in a state of panic. One by one, they are still living in a drunken stupor, unaware of the changes in the outside world. They are passionate about internal strife. The 4 princes have grown up and each has their own backing. The fight for the throne is interspersed with the increasingly serious struggle between different factions. If you go to Shangjing, I am worried that you will not be able to return. When he was anxious, he did not even address himself as Ci anymore. He directly addressed himself as I. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. "I will not be able to return?" Don't underestimate those relatives and eunuchs. When they go crazy, they are not afraid of anyone. Jiang Pingji was calm and played with the teacup in her hand. I will consider what you said carefully. However, regarding the matter of sending off my sister's marriage, even if it is a dangerous place I have to go. Wealth comes from danger. I don't know that those relatives and eunuchs are colluding with each other to create trouble. But don't worry, these useless fellows will not be able to touch a single hair of mine. Wei Ci pursed his lips. His expression became complicated. Jiang Pingji suddenly said, I am not that weak. I know. Then you can relax and wait for a good show. In the eyes of others, Shangjing may be a dangerous place, but for her, it was definitely the beginning of her journey to the 9 states and 4 seas. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.